Chapter 617. It's a alchemy beast. Professor Lily tapped Dake's head and said, "If you pour milk into its body, it can produce cheese. If you stuff it with grapes, it can make wine. Not only that, alchemy beast can also synthesize metals and precisely shape them. Kazair often uses it to make all kinds of precision parts and repair the school's patrolling statues." Dake dodged her fingers and said, "A top-level tool beast?" "Hee," Professor Lily said. "You can say that." Dake couldn't help but sigh. "I'm so envious." The name of this alchemy beast was related to alchemy. According to Professor Lily, it was very likely that it could shorten and simplify the alchemy process. This kind of magic fairy with both functions was very precious. Dake actually had a similar magic fairy, Kettle. Of course, Kettle and alchemy beast were very different in terms of functions, so they couldn't be compared together. He looked around again and withdrew his gaze. "Remember, https://m, VIP Kanchu. VIP Professor Shi-Erfa's, Wind Fairy King Shi-Erfu. Professor Lily's Fantasy Fairy Dragon. Professor Cheongxi's Rock Armor Giant Bear. Claire's Dust Lion. Professor Kazair's Alchemy Beast." There were a total of 5 of them, and each of them was at the 4th tier. With these 5 magic fairies, it should be enough to sweep through the 102nd floor. Professor Shi-Erfu saw that everyone had summoned their magic fairies. He waved his wand and tapped them one by one. This time, everyone's feet were surrounded by a cyclone of wind. Dake tapped his feet and felt that his body was much lighter. He could jump into the air with a little force and walk with the wind. However, he turned his head slightly and saw that Professor Nini had already put Professor Kazair on her shoulder. After all, Professor Kazair was old enough to travel long distances. Professor Shi-Erfu did not choose him in the beginning because he was old. Also, Professor Kazair was a typical mage who stood still. He was not good at fighting while on the move. Therefore, after Professor Shi-Erfu chose to invite him, he found Professor Nini, who could make up for his shortcomings. With Professor Nini around, Professor Kazair would have an easier time. "Stop looking. Come with me." Professor Lily suddenly grabbed Dake's arm and brought him onto the back of the Fantasy Fairy Dragon. Dake had been trained to ride a dragon before, so he didn't panic. He quickly found a suitable place to sit down. The Fantasy Fairy Dragon's back was flat, and its neck was long and slender. It could be hugged easily. After he sat down, he looked at Professor Lily. Immediately afterwards, his vision blurred. Little Lily had already burrowed into his embrace, sitting on the dragon's spine with his little butt raised. Professor Shi-Erfa glanced over there and said with satisfaction, "Since everything is ready, let's go now, Pawa." Professor Cheongxi nodded and drove the rock armor giant bear to walk in front. Then she took out a magic card and pasted it on her body. She changed into a full set of armor from head to toe. She was tall and big to begin with, so the armor she wore made her look even more heroic. Claire looked at Professor Cheongxi's broad back, and a trace of nostalgia flashed in her eyes. The magic card in her hand lit up and emitted an invisible field. The extremely lazy Dust Lion also stood up unwillingly and strolled beside her. Professor Shi-Erfa's Wind Elf King Shi-Erfa flew into the air and created a wind barrier to surround the whole team. Fantasy Fairy Dragon and Gold Refined Beast moved as well. Little Bear Cub and Otis Brook were thrown onto the back of the Fantasy Fairy Dragon. It was still the same formation as before. A group of people entered the passage and went up the stairs quickly. Soon, they arrived at the 102nd floor. What came into view was a scene of spring with blooming flowers. The lower the floor of the dungeon, the larger the area. Every floor was almost a small world. The environment of some floors was extremely ferocious, and there was no place to stay. But there were also some floors with excellent environments that made people linger. Dake looked at the blooming flowers and wanted to say that he was lucky. Then he saw the Wind Elf King Shi-Erfa floating in the air suddenly raise his hand with his palm facing up. Then a horrifying vortex suddenly formed. After a short 2 or 3 seconds, fog suddenly appeared out of nowhere and was sucked in by the vortex. In the blink of an eye, the scene of flowers blooming in spring that one yearned for had completely vanished as if it had never existed. After which, Countless scarlet eyes appeared around the entrance of the stairs. A humanoid monster with a huge flower on its head and a body made of plant roots quietly hid behind the herd of beasts. A thick fog was released from the flower bud in the center of the flower. Dake suddenly understood that the scene of spring blooming flowers was just an illusion created by this monster. But the professors seemed to be used to it and were not surprised at all. Professor Cheongse's rock armor giant bear suddenly stomped on the ground. With a loud boom, the whole ground suddenly exploded. Countless amounts of soil rolled up and swallowed all the monsters around it. Even the humanoid monster with the flower petals on its head was crushed by the mud waves amidst its screams. A mirage flower. Professor Cheongse turned to Professor Ka Zaire and asked, "Do you need it?" Professor Ka Zaire shook his head and said, "It's a pity that it's broken. Otherwise, it could be made into a specimen. It's quite rare." Professor Cheongse said, "Since you don't need it, let's move on." With that as the beginning, the group quickly moved forward. The monsters on the 102nd floor were powerful and treacherous. They were very dangerous and hard to defend against. But in terms of knowledge and power, the professors here were the best in the world. They were cautious enough so their path was smooth. Dake sat on the back of the fantasy fairy dragon and watched as the third-tier monsters were crushed and killed. He was shocked at the beginning and became used to it. In the huge and complex dungeon, the professors didn't even need to stop to find their way. They never got lost. In Professor Li's words, Professor Shi Erfu could listen to the sound of the wind. As long as there was wind, there was no path that she couldn't find. During this process, Dake finally saw how the professors fought. Professor Jones was a typical close combat warrior. Even though he was a mage, he liked to equip himself with weapons and armor, so that he could fight alongside the rock armor giant bear. Professor Shi Erfu's Wind Elf King, Shi Erfu seemed to be able to synchronize with her. No matter what kind of wind magic she used, it could copy and even strengthen it. Claire's Dust Lion was still as lazy as before. However, wherever it walked, the dust on the ground would condense into horrifying birds and beasts. Under its command, the birds and beasts would launch a sea of attacks against the demon beasts. Professor Ka Zaire's alchemy beast was very mysterious. Dake just watched as Professor Ka Zaire stuffed various materials into the alchemy beast. Then the alchemy beast would continuously shoot out colorful light beams, flames and cannons, blasting the monsters to pieces. As for Professor Li's fantasy fairy dragon, it meowed the entire time. Equals Omega smiley face. Obviously, the monsters were the masters of the dungeon. But after the battle began, they were the ones who had the advantage in numbers. The normal monsters on the 102nd floor couldn't pose an effective threat to them at all. Under the guidance of Professor Shi Erfu, they perfectly avoided all kinds of traps and nests. They passed through the entire floor as quickly as possible and arrived at the meeting room on the 102nd floor unscathed. But even so, it was close to dusk when they arrived. After seeing the magic marker in the center of the meeting room, Dake's tense nerves finally relaxed. He grabbed the bear cub and got down from the fantasy fairy dragon. Then he borrowed a new magic collection device from Professor Ka Zaire and collected the magic marker's magic. The magic marker on the 102nd floor was a spire that went straight to the sky. If one looked closely, there seemed to be a figure moving inside. After he collected the magic, the professors had already spread out the field and used the gourmet card to summon all kinds of delicacies. The food problem that always troubled adventurers no longer existed after they had the gourmet card. But they didn't stop. After eating dinner, in just half an hour, they went up to the 101st floor. The dungeon at night was even more dangerous. But for the monsters on the 101st floor, it seemed that outsiders like them were more dangerous. In order to not have any accidents in the night shell, the professors unanimously increased their firepower. The coverage of the firepower increased by nearly half to ensure that no monsters could sneak up on them. It was not yet midnight. The group successfully passed through the 101st floor and arrived at the meeting room on this floor. Dake collected the magic as usual, and the professors began to set up the camp. Claire took out the Animal Kingdom field card and turned the entire meeting room into a paradise for animals. the professors didn't release their respective magic elves. With their magic recovery speed, it was enough to maintain these magic elves for a long time. Claire was known as the Sage of Beasts, but she had the least amount of magic other than Professor Nini. This was the disadvantage of humans, but it was also the opportunity for the birth of magical technology. Relying on the Animal Kingdom field card, she could maintain more magic elves for a long time. Dake and the others chose their own rooms in the Animal Kingdom as their temporary residence and quickly went to sleep. At night, there were scattered monsters that tried to approach, but they were all killed by the magic elves. The magic elves' methods were clean and neat, and they didn't even make too much noise. In the blink of an eye, the night passed. The glowing moss lit up the dungeon. The adventurers opened their eyes. Above the 101st floor was the 100th floor, and above that was the 99th floor of their destination. At noon, Dake and the others finally arrived at the meeting room on the 100th floor. They enjoyed lunch while continuing yesterday's topic. But among the people present, except for Professor Nini, no one was naive. Everyone was mentally prepared to fight if the communication failed. Monsters were monsters after all. Even though the professors were very lenient toward Shirley Augustine, and even though Othbrook's inner essence was the Plague Lord, they still didn't kill him on the spot. However, the line in their hearts was very clear. Once they couldn't communicate, they would be completely destroyed. It's time to wake her up, right? Professor Cheongsi walked over with Othbrook and threw him on the ground. Professor Shi-Erfa nodded slightly. We still need her to lead the way. Professor Kazair took out a tube of potion and poured it on Othbrook's nose. Othbrook suddenly shivered and let out a short scream, instantly waking up. But halfway through the scream, she suddenly realized that her voice had completely disappeared, and she immediately shut her mouth in fear. Professor Shi-Erfu removed the mute card and pushed a plate of fruit over. Eat something first. Othbrook was stunned for a moment and immediately wolfed down the food. It wasn't that there weren't any fruits in the dungeon. It just wanted to show its submission attitude. Professor Kazair glanced at him and said, "Tell me how to get to the abyss." Othbrook stopped and said, "Our base is built in a hidden room on the 99th floor, and there's a concealment barrier around it. If someone comes close, someone will lead them away. Unless they're members of the organization, they can't." Before he could say anything, Professor Kazair already looked away and said, "I think I know where it is. Are you full?" Othbrook. Not yet," Professor Kazair nodded. "Then hurry up and eat." After Othbrook nervously ate the entire plate of fruit, he suddenly felt his consciousness become blurry, and his thoughts became sluggish. Then with a plop sound he fell on the table. Professor Kazair took back the magic card and said, "It's not hard to find." It was indeed not hard to find. From entering the 99th floor to the entrance of the Abyss base, the professors only took 2 hours. The concealment barrier around the base was like child's play in front of Professor Kazair. In fact, they even did the opposite. When they stepped into the boundary, they concealed themselves. As a result, they were not discovered until they arrived at the entrance of the base. "Is this the place?" Professor Shi-Erfu slightly raised his head and looked at the ordinary mountain wall in front of him with a serious expression. "Yes." Professor Kazair smiled and twirled the magic wand in his hand between his fingers, like a butterfly flying through flowers. In the non-maze dungeons, mountain walls, tree holes, and river bottom were all common entrances to hidden rooms. The hidden room in the Abyss base was no exception. However, the entrance to the base had obviously been modified, and it couldn't be triggered by normal means. According to Othbrook's memory, every time he entered the base, he would knock on the mountain wall 3 times, and then open the door from the inside. In other words, there must be magical guards on the other side of the wall. In this case, unless there was something wrong with the guards' brains, they wouldn't open the door for uninvited guests like them. However, since they were uninvited guests, they had to follow the rules of uninvited guests. Professor Kazair patted Professor Nini's shoulder, and the latter lifted him up and put him on the ground. He walked to the mountain wall and took out 3 hemispherical items from the dungeon storage box. Then he threw them up and made the 3 items stick to the mountain wall. Then a magical light suddenly shot out from the items and formed a triangle. Professor Kazair took 2 steps back and said, "Alchemy beast." The alchemy beast immediately put down its black arm. Professor Kazair put a triangular item in its palm. It took the item and pressed it hard on its forehead, embedding it into its body. Then a magical whirlpool appeared in the alchemy beast's transparent body. The triangular item on its forehead instantly released a triangular beam of light. After it was enlarged, it perfectly matched the triangle on the mountain wall. Half a minute later, the triangular beam of light suddenly shrank, and a triangular door that led to the inside of the base appeared on the mountain wall. The next moment, a siren sounded. Although the professors said that they were here for a friendly exchange, their actions were not friendly at all. Dake sat on the fantasy fairy dragon's back and couldn't help but stick the fairy puppet to his body. He wasn't worried about the professors, but he was worried about himself. As for Little Bear Cub, it was lying on his back, shivering. The pressure from the monster bosses had already shrouded them like a dark cloud. However, the guard hiding behind the door poked his head out to take a look and immediately retreated. The alarm sounded even more urgent after that. Then suddenly the siren disappeared, the pressure retreated, and everything returned to silence. But at this moment, the atmosphere behind the triangular door was full of pressure. Professor Cheongsi stood with his arms crossed in front of his chest and smiled. "It's time to go in." "Let's go." Professor Shi Erfu nodded. Then, with the rock armor bear taking the lead, everyone went through the triangular door and entered the hidden room, which was where the Abyss base was located. The Abyss organization hadn't existed for a long time. According to Othbrook's explanation, the Abyss was established after their leader appeared and recruited the monsters that had awakened one by one. That was how the Abyss reached its current scale. As if to make it easier for the monsters to come in and out, the entire hidden room was greatly expanded. The internal structure was like a mansion, and the walls on both sides were smooth and clean. The madness and bloodthirstiness of the monsters were not reflected in the architectural style at all. The exquisite decorations everywhere gave off a sense of liveliness. They didn't encounter any monsters along the way. The guard hiding behind the door had already escaped. It wasn't until about 3 minutes later that a monster finally blocked the path. Professor Cheongsi stopped, but the rock armor bear didn't stop. Roar! The giant bear's angry roar echoed in the sealed passage. It swung its dragon-like long tail and gradually sped up. Its sharp steel claws mercilessly stabbed at the monster's chest. But the monster instantly pulled out its sword and blocked the rock armor bear's steel claws with a giant broadsword that was more than 2 meters long. Clang! Sparks flew everywhere. The rock armor bear didn't hesitate at all and waved its claws at high speed, leaving glaring scratches on the broadsword. Finally, the monster couldn't take it anymore and took 3 steps back. But after 3 steps, it pushed its heels and raised its hands. Black tentacles crazily drilled out of its sleeves and wrapped around the broadsword like black snakes. Bang! The tentacles were completely imprinted on the broadsword, and pitch-black flames burst out. Ha! The monster suddenly roared and swung its broadsword, violently slashing at the rock armor bear's arm. A crack appeared on the rock armor giant bear's rock armor vambrace. But the crack healed in the blink of an eye. The rock armor bear suddenly opened its mouth, and a terrifying beam of light swallowed the entire passage. When the beam of light disappeared, the monster's body was already in tatters. The black flame armor that it had put on was shivering in the wind. Dake frowned as he recognized this monster. This monster was wearing a bamboo hat and black clothes. It held a broadsword in its hand, and it was very similar to the swordsman he encountered when he was fighting the boss on the 10th floor. But the difference in strength between the two was like heaven and earth. The broadsword user he saw and defeated was only at the 2nd rank, but this monster in front of him was almost at the 4th rank. So that's how it is. The one that was with Othbrook was just a clone? That makes sense now. The doubts that he had until now were all cleared up. Dake's eyes flashed as he thought about the first defeat that Senior Panduola suffered after entering the underground city. If the opponent was such a powerful monster, it was normal that she could not defeat it. But if it was really him, a monster that was almost at the 4th rank was only a boss on the 17th floor? Or did it become stronger after that? Human. While Dake was thinking, the monster suddenly opened its mouth, and its voice was a little magnetic. Professor Cheongsi immediately stopped the rock armor bear from continuing its attack and asked curiously, "Another one that can speak human language?" The monster held its broadsword and said, "Since you are here, you must have a rough idea. I was once the swordsman of the Mystic Beast clan Audiobook. When I woke up, I was the boss on the 17th floor. However, I have only used my clone to fight with others, and I have never really hurt the students of the academy." Professor Cheongsi thought for a while and said, "The swordsman of the Mystic Beast clan is a beast man?" Audiobook slowly removed the bandages on his face, revealing a beast man face that was full of scars. Such a frank action dispelled Professor Cheongsi's doubts. She turned to look at Kazair and saw Kazair nodding at him. Professor Cheongsi was relieved and asked directly, "Audiobook, bring us to see your leader." Audiobook nodded slightly and was very cooperative. Maybe the reason why he appeared was to lead the way. Professor Kazair sat back on Professor Nini's shoulder and looked at Audiobook with narrowed eyes. He suddenly asked, "When did you know that we would come?" Audiobook's back was facing them as he led the way. When he was asked this question, his expression did not change at all. However, Professor Kazair already knew what was going on. "I see your fog demon advisor has the ability to divine. Its memory came from the Star Tower astrologer?" Audiobook's shoulders trembled as he could not hold it in anymore. "Continue." However, Professor Cheongsi said calmly behind him. Audiobook paused for a moment and could only continue walking forward. After about 5 minutes, they finally arrived in front of a door after taking a few turns. This door was actually a golden door. The door was decorated with very complicated and exquisite patterns. At the upper part of the door, there was a round ocean blue pearl inlaid in a very exaggerated manner. The professors looked at each other and suddenly felt more confident about their previous guesses. The leader, behind the door, maybe it was really the Golden Mermaid? They just did not know which of the many legends it was. Dang dang dang. Audiobook raised his hand and knocked on the door. The golden door opened automatically from the inside. A majestic water vapor suddenly surged out, making people feel slightly uncomfortable. The entrance was blocked by a partition. After passing through the entrance and walking into the room, they could see the scene inside. Excluding those insignificant decorations on the wall, the most important equipment in the room was undoubtedly the rectangular conference table in the middle. On both sides of the long table, there were square chairs of different sizes. The chair on the main seat was the most luxurious and luxurious. At this moment, there were already a few people sitting at the conference table. The higher-ups of the Abyss organization were waiting solemnly. Professor Cheongsi was the first to enter the room. Her gaze swept across the entire room in an instant and took in every corner of the room. At this moment, the rock armor giant bear was walking behind her with an imposing manner like a mountain. She walked straight to the front of the conference table and casually pulled out a chair. She sat down very naturally and then supported her chin with her hands as she carefully observed the demons in the room. Professor Shi Erfu followed closely behind and sat down on the seat opposite the main seat without any hesitation. Wind Elf King Shi Erfu floated behind her as if it was a substitute. "Welcome to the Abyss." At this moment, the leader on the main seat invited them. Its voice was deliberately hoarse. Claire, Professor Kazair, Professor Nini, as well as Dake and Professor Li, who were walking at the back, all took a look at it and then sat down one after another. Dake sat between Claire and Professor Li, on the right-hand side of Professor Shi Erfu. Professor Cheongsi, Professor Kazair, and Professor Nini sat on the left-hand side. Orsbrook was casually thrown outside the door, but the bear cub, Shirley Augustine, was brought in and placed on a chair by Li. Of course, it was frightened by the tense atmosphere in the conference room, and was pretending to be Li's teddy bear. The higher-ups of the Abyss were not all here. Dake recalled Orsbrook's words as he observed and compared them. There were only 6 higher-ups in this conference room. Sitting on the main seat was the leader, but it was shrouded in a thick mist like a water elemental sitting on a chair. A pearl bigger than its head floated above its head. Dake resisted the urge to use the Eye of Truth and looked at the leader. S side. On the seat closest to the leader, S left, the legendary Fog Demon advisor, was sitting quietly. The Fog Demon turned into a female form. It put its hands on the table, and a crystal ball floated in the air between its two hands. On the opposite side of the Fog Demon sat the Ice Emperor bird. The Ice Emperor bird was a superior species of the hubby, and it was a harpy. It had a female head and body with long hair, and its arms and wings were fused together. Below its thighs were huge bird claws. The Ice Emperor bird's hair color and wings were icy blue with white light, like ice crystals, emitting a cold air. Its face was also like its attribute, like a cold beauty. Although it was a demon, it obviously had a sense of shame, and it used its feather-woven chest to cover its important parts. The remaining 3 higher-ups all sat on the right side of the Ice Emperor bird, and they took up half of the 8 captains. The Night Crow King and the Red-Eyed Dragon Demon weren't there, but the 8 Treasures Spider Lady could be seen. The 8 Treasures Spider Lady was a demon with a human upper body and an 8 Treasures Spider lower body. There were a total of 8 pearls on its spider body, and they looked like 8 huge eyes. Its body was an extremely normal human body, and it wore soft armor and carried a longbow on its back. It was obvious that it was an archer. Beside the 8 Treasures Spider Lady were the pigman and the snake-haired witch. The pigman wasn't a pig, but a huge pigman. Its height and width were similar, and its face was full of fat. Although it wasn't ugly, the oil that kept flowing down its body made people want to avoid it. The snake-haired witch was a subspecies of Medusa, and some Nagas were called that after becoming witches. The snake-haired witch in front of them was obviously the latter. The biggest difference between them was whether their lower body was a human or a snake. The snake-haired witch had beautiful facial features, a long neck and a graceful body. Her waist was as slender and soft as a snake, and her legs were long and round. She only wore a tight-fitting witch robe, and she looked weak and boneless. The pigman and the snake-haired witch sat together, and they were like 2 extremes. The atmosphere was a bit tense. These demon bosses were in their own territory, but they didn't have any aura at all. Instead, the outsiders, the humans, had the upper hand. Professor Shi-Erfu was the first to speak and break the silence. Since you're already sitting here, it means that you're rational enough and willing to communicate with us in a friendly manner. So let's start with self-introductions. We'll talk after we get to know each other. What do you think? The mist on the main seat moved and the leader's voice came from it. Okay. Professor Shi-Erfu said with a serious expression. Then as the host, you go first. The mist trembled violently, and then the pearl on top of its head started to spin. The mist slowly fell from the top to the bottom like a tide. At this moment, the other demons couldn't help but look over. According to Earbook, no one in the Abyss organization had seen the leader's true appearance. These high-level demons probably didn't expect that the leader would reveal his true appearance for the first time. Last night, the leader summoned all the 8 captains through the strategist and had an emergency meeting overnight. That was why today's scene was happening. Although they were in their own territory, every demon knew that they were the weaker side. Not to mention how powerful the professors were. Even the entire underground city belonged to them. It meant that there was a knife on their necks from the beginning to the end. If the Shungmalian Academy wanted to, they could close the underground city at any time and never let them see the light of day again. Although they didn't know if the Shungmalian Academy could do it, they thought that it could. So in the end, they were really living under someone else's roof. The professors of the outsiders were the real hosts of this event. The leader of the Abyss organization obviously knew this very well. He didn't think of resisting from the beginning. At this moment, he obediently removed the mist around his body and revealed his true appearance that he had never shown before. But as the mist gradually fell, the people in the room suddenly felt that something was wrong. Why is it that the leader's head isn't at the normal neck position? This question caused a small question mark to appear in almost everyone's mind. Only little Lily kept blinking his eyes, and Professor Ka Zaire took a deep breath. Whoosh! The mist suddenly dissipated, and the leader's true appearance was completely exposed. The high-level demon's expressions froze for a moment. Dark and the rest of the professors also had a shocked expression on their faces. Then Professor Shi-Erfu suddenly stared at Professor Kazair. Professor Kazair looked away again. On the spacious seat, there was a golden mermaid, with long golden hair and fish scales sitting on it. She wore a pearl necklace and a seashell around her chest. Her skin was as white as jade, and her face was extremely tender. Her eyes were so bright that it seemed like there were 2 pools of water hidden in them. Other than being a little younger, she was no different from the golden mermaid that everyone expected. Well, other than being a little younger. The boss of the 120th floor of the dungeon was a golden mermaid cub that looked like she was 11 or 12 years old. Of course, if it was just a demon, no one would care about its appearance and age. Because appearance was just a shell to a demon, and they didn't have a matching soul. But once a demon had a sense of self, everything would be different. Even Date couldn't help but wonder how Professor Kazair made her cry. But then again, he also understood why she had to hide her true appearance in front of the other demons. How could she possibly control those powerful demonic bosses when she looked so weak that she could be crushed at any time? The Golden Mermaid, who had revealed her true appearance, looked like a little tearful bag. The Golden Mermaid looked at the reactions of the demons and humans with tears in her eyes. Without the mist, her voice sounded a little childish. As you can see, I am the royalty of the mermaids. I am the Golden Mermaid, Asalia Pettis. You should know that appearance doesn't determine a person's character, so don't look at me like that. Leader. Asalia Pettis tried to make herself look serious, but the demons all stared at her with their eyes wide open. Their expressions didn't change at all. Obviously, the moment she revealed her true appearance, she had lost her dignity. Unless she showed her power on the spot and used her power as the boss of the 120th floor to re-establish her dignity and remind them of her terrifying power. But now was not the time. Also, Asalia Pettis couldn't be tough at this moment. She pursed her lips and looked at Kazair. She said timidly, "Now it's your turn." Professor Sylph retracted her gaze and introduced herself to Asalia. She then briefly explained the purpose of her visit. Asalia nodded slightly and said, "Can I understand that you came with good intentions?" "Good intentions are mutual, isn't it? If you can tell us the whereabouts of the other 4 captains, and how you can awaken the monsters, we'll be kind." Professor Sylph said calmly, "If you can tell us all about the whereabouts of the other 4 captains and how you can awaken the monsters, we'll be kind." At this point in the conversation, the monster bosses finally stopped staring at Asalia. Asalia pursed her lips and said, "My strategist made a prophecy yesterday. He said that we will welcome a new life today. The captains who didn't want to welcome the new life all chose to leave. They took some of the executors with them. They are no longer related to the abyss." Professor Shi-Erfu turned to Kazair. Professor Kazair nodded and said, "Yes, they ran away." Professor Shi-Erfu turned back and said, "I can think of the reason why they chose to run away. But since you chose to stay, does it mean that you are willing to accept our arrangement?" Aisha glanced at the strategist on her left and said, "It's like this. Of course, we will do our best to fight for our own interests without causing any conflict." Professor Shi-Erfu nodded and said, "Then let's continue the unfinished introduction. Asalia Pettis. Why are you remembered by history?" Asalia Pettis took a deep breath and said, "The glazed lamp. I broke the glazed lamp of the god of the sea and caused the climate to go out of control. 10 years of thunderstorms and hurricanes prevented the Oceanids from rising to the surface. They spent 10 long years in the undersea god kingdom without seeing the sun. You are the princess of the Oceanids who broke the god of the sea's lamp?" Lily suddenly said. Her eyes were bright, and her curiosity was almost overflowing. Asalia Pettis glanced furtively at her, and then straightened her face, and pretended not to recognize her. Professor Shi-Erfu thought carefully and turned to the fog demon strategist and said, "Then can I ask this Star Tower astrologer to introduce herself? Also, although your disguise is realistic, it shouldn't be necessary in the future." The military advisor smirked, and the fog around him suddenly dissipated. There was no longer a trace of the fog demon aura. The one sitting on the chair was a real human woman. Correction. Although my appearance and memories came from the Star Tower astrologer, I am not her military advisor, said with a faint sense of rationality in his tone. 19/127. Good evening. 3. Although it was a bit slow, it wrote 10,000 this time. Keep up the good work. Keep up the good work. Try to update tomorrow morning. Chapter 6:18. In the dungeon of Shungmalian Academy, elite monsters or bosses with pure human appearances were not uncommon. Those human powerhouses who had left important footprints in history would occasionally be projected by the dungeon to fight with the students. The military counselor, in front of him, was one of them. But unlike other monsters who gradually mixed themselves up with their original bodies after obtaining their memories, it was very clear that it was just a brand new individual with the appearance and memories of the original body, not a real resurrection. It was just that this rationality also came from that memory, and it was actually very unfavorable for them to state this fact clearly, because if it was resurrected, it would be the original body. If it was not resurrected, it would still be a monster. Just like Xiongbao's previous concerns, the monster bosses present, except for the military counselor, were more willing to be regarded as the resurrection of the original body. Even Asalia Patis called herself the princess of the sea from the beginning. But the military counselor exposed this point. Website. https://m. vipcanchu. VIP. Dolores Stark. This is the name of the original body in my memory. She was an astrologer of the Star Tower, and once predicted the defeat of the demon race. Of course, I don't mind if you call me Dolores. Dolores Stark said faintly with a trace of pride in her tone. Although it did not think that it was Dolores Stark herself, it was still proud of it. Dolores Stark was a very famous hero in the history of the war between humans and the demon race. When humans were at a great disadvantage, she bravely predicted the defeat of the demon race, and personally went to the front line to encourage the morale of the soldiers. Although she was eventually assassinated by the demon race, her death also thoroughly aroused the resistance of the human and subhuman soldiers. Her name was still engraved on the hero tablet in the Star Tower. After the professors heard this name, they were all touched. But it was just touching. They also knew that the Dolores Stark in front of them was not the original body resurrected. The monster body copied by the dungeon was significantly different from the real human body in the core, and it was impossible to confuse them. Dolores Stark was known as the Revelator in history. If her resurrection was announced to the world, it would inevitably set off a huge storm in a short period of time. However, when people came to their senses, it was very likely that there would be a rebellion. Because of the existence of Dolores Stark, the monster, to the dead, it was a kind of blasphemy. Because of this, it was very difficult to decide how to deal with these demonic creatures. Professor Shi-Erfu took a deep breath and said, "Let's talk about Stark later. If my guess is correct, there's no need for the rest of you to hide your identity. Why don't you tell me everything at once?" The remaining demonic creature bosses looked at each other and said one after another. The original form of the Ice Emperor bird was a harpy that lived in an extremely cold place. It was not a human, but it was the guardian of a small human country. It had protected the small country from the harsh environment for hundreds of years. The original experience of the Octogem Spider Lady was very similar to the Ice Emperor bird, but it protected the forest elves and was once worshipped as a totem by the forest elves. As for the Pigman and the Snake-Haired Witch, their original bodies belonged to the Orc race, and each of them was a hero of the Orc race. In other words, the 6 higher-ups of the Abyss present were all good characters in their original bodies. They did not need to hide their identity, nor did they need to worry about being treated badly because of their original bodies. This was the main reason why they were sitting here. In other words, the other 4 captains who chose to escape were all bad characters in their original bodies. The dungeon was so big that if the 4 captains wanted to hide, even the professors would have a hard time finding them in the corner. Their choice was not wrong for them. After the monsters introduced themselves, the professors also briefly introduced their identities and names. In this way, the 2 sides could be considered to have a mutual understanding of each other, which was more beneficial for the following discussion. The Golden Mermaid, Asalia Patis first explained the cause and purpose of establishing the Abyss organization. Everything started a few years ago. Professor Kazair and the other two went deep into the dungeon during the holidays to find the tears of the Golden Mermaid. In the end, they came to the boss room on the 120th floor of the dungeon and found Asalia Patis. After a battle, Asalia Patis was captured alive. She intentionally skipped over what happened after that. In short, she was spared after that and got rid of the restraints of the dungeon on monsters. She relied on her own will to walk out of the boss room. At that time, she was in the stage where her memory was quickly recovering, and her personality was quickly becoming similar to her original body. Her temperament was completely consistent with her appearance. She cried as she wandered. Because she was afraid of killing monsters, because she was lonely, she tried to catch monsters and raise them. Later, she mistakenly entered the meeting room and found the stairs to the upper floor. Only then did she know what kind of world she was in. She subconsciously began to climb up, only thinking that if she kept going up, one day she would be able to escape from the dungeon and return to the surface. But when she climbed up to the 99th floor with difficulty, she met the first monster that had awakened. From that monster, she learned a lot of information that she did not know and learned how to disguise herself. After that, she met military counselor Dolores Stark, and for the first time, she had the idea of forming a force. Dolores Stark had also been thinking about how to ensure her safety when she returned to the surface, and the appearance of Asalia Patis was also an opportunity for her. In short, our original purpose of establishing the Abyss organization was to obtain a bargaining chip. Asalia Patis was very honest. We never wanted to go against the Academy from the beginning. We understood that there were more magic beasts awakening in the underground city, so we gathered them. Only by building a strong enough collective can we negotiate with the Academy on an equal footing. You won't be crushed like an ant that crawls onto a dining table. Professor Shi-Erfa smiled after hearing this and did not say anything. Asalia Patis glanced at her and continued. Although we are not strong enough now, we are sincere enough, so, Professor Shi-Erfa slowly said, state your requirements. Asalia Patis pursed her lips and said, first safety. Professor Shi-Erfa nodded and said, this is the foundation. Asalia Patis immediately let out a sigh of relief and tried to say, then freedom. Professor Shi-Erfa frowned slightly. Asalia Patis hurriedly said, of course it's relative freedom. Professor Shi-Erfa said, you need to come out of the dungeon and come under the Academy's management. In return, the Academy will provide you with what you need, and after a review, you will be given relative freedom. As long as you cooperate, we will consider your opinions and give you preferential treatment. Asalia Patis could not help but look at the others. Seeing that the higher-ups did not refute, Asalia nodded and said, in principle we can accept, but the details need to be discussed and the contract drawn up. The conversation between the two sides quickly progressed. The monsters had never thought of going against the Academy from the beginning. This was the key to making the conversation go smoothly. However, the Abyss organization had in fact been divided into two parts. Those who stayed here were the ones who chose to defect, and the ones who were really difficult to deal with were the ones who left. However, Asalia could also provide a detailed list of those who left so that the Academy could find and deal with them. The entire conversation lasted for 3 hours. Professor Shi-Erfa finally promised to provide them with a place to stay in the dense forest, and according to the results of the review, facilities such as Traveler's Street would be gradually opened. However, the monsters had to wear the restraints made by Professor Kazair, and they could not have too much contact with the students. In addition, there were actually a large number of monsters hidden in the dungeon who had already awakened. The strategist of the Abyss, Dolores Stark, had the special ability to search for these monsters. Professor Shi-Erfa planned to set up a department under the Academy's jurisdiction to replace the Abyss and take over these monsters. He would also provide the corresponding jobs, and let them shoulder the responsibility of searching for these monsters. With this as the core, the two sides finally drew up a temporary contract and signed it on the spot. The whole process was so smooth that it made people wonder if they were negotiating with the monsters. However, the reason for this was actually because of the absolute power of the Academy's professors. Under the supervision of Professor Kazair, nobody could lie. I hope that our cooperation will continue to be pleasant. Professor Shi Erfu arranged the contract and said calmly, "Let's continue. Let's move on to the next segment." Reaching an agreement with the Abyss organization was actually an unexpected gain. This wasn't the initial purpose of Dake and his companions when they entered the dungeon. They didn't even know about the existence of such an organization. Their true purpose was to find the source of the monster's awakening. After reaching an agreement with the Abyss organization, they finally had a clue about the source. The clue was actually beneath their feet. On the surface, the Abyss organization's base was in a hidden room, but that wasn't the case. They weren't in a hidden room, but a hidden space. Hidden space and hidden room were only a word apart, but the meaning was completely different. Professor Shi Erfu was quite surprised when he heard this. They kept the contract and followed Asalia and the other monsters out of the conference room. Then they went deeper into the dungeon. Asalia took the lead and said, "Just like you're looking for the reason of the monster's awakening, we're also looking for the reason of our awakening. We call it the source." The reason why we chose to build our base here was because it was the closest place to origin that we could find. The hidden spaces mechanism allowed us to surpass the dungeon's hierarchy and close the distance to the source. However, we still can't touch it. "How far is it?" Professor Shi Erfu interrupted her. Asalia said, "It's just ahead." It was indeed just ahead. After Dark heard those words, he took a step forward. His vision suddenly changed, and he entered the cold cave from the modern passageway. He was taken aback and suddenly noticed that his hand was grabbed by Li Li. The professors stopped in their tracks, and they looked solemn. A scalp-numbing aura emanated from the end of the cave. Asalia turned her head and said in a low voice, "Follow me." They continued forward. After only 3 minutes, the so-called source appeared in front of everyone. It was a huge heart hanging on the mountain wall. Thump, thump, thump. Dark suddenly covered his heart, and the sound of his huge heart beating suddenly echoed in the cave, causing the hearts of all the people and monsters to gradually beat in sync with it. Their blood flowed quickly as if it was boiling, and their skin turned red. Clap. Asalia suddenly clapped her hands, and the huge pearl above her head spun, releasing a water curtain in front of everyone. The water curtain began to beat rhythmically, but it reduced the impact of the huge heart beating. Everyone's expression quickly returned to normal. Professor Shi Erfu took 2 steps forward and said in surprise, "This is the source you mentioned?" Asalia nodded and said, "But it doesn't really exist here. It's just a projection like a mirage. Fortunately, we can't get close to it. Once we get close to it, we can't help but bow to it. It's as if everything in our body was given by it, and we can't help but give ourselves to it." When she said this, Asalia's legs were trembling. She was obviously trying to control it. The other monsters were no exception. If they continued to move forward, they were likely to throw themselves under the huge heart, prostrating themselves on the ground and offering their lives. Even if it was just a projection, they couldn't extricate themselves. The hidden space allowed them to see the projection of the source and made them realize their own insignificance. What level is the projection of this huge heart on? Where is the projection's body? Dake stared at the heart, and the idea of finding something related to God to complete the great sin quickly faded away. The goddess of the moon in the secret passage contained very little God's will, which made him think that he wasn't careful enough. The god hidden in the underground city was obviously more complete. With his current strength, there was no way he could come in contact with it. Pride -1, a system prompt suddenly appeared in front of him. Dake's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but smile. "What are you smiling about?" Lily whispered into his ear. Dake blinked and said casually, "Look at the projection of the heart. Which level should it be?" "Level boss." Lily was startled and asked suspiciously, "Why do you think that the heart's projection is a level boss?" "Wait. Lily's eyes suddenly widened, and she hugged Dake and exclaimed, "Yes, it's a level boss." Since the level bosses of the Shung Malian underground city were all projections of people who left important footprints in history. Why couldn't they be gods? In the complete history of this world, was there anyone who left a more important footprint than the gods of the past? The reason why they had never thought of this was because they felt that the level of the gods was too high, and because they had never seen one before. But the reason why they had never seen one before, wasn't it because the level of the gods was too high? So the level bosses that simulated them were all at the lowest level of the underground city. Conservatively speaking, it should be at least 200 levels below, right? Lily suddenly had an idea. And she suddenly felt that she was too smart. And she couldn't help but smile proudly. Then, her smile was pushed aside by Dake's palm. What are you talking about? What level boss? Claire was originally carefully observing the giant heart, but she couldn't help but turn around and ask with narrowed eyes. Dake and Lily quickly became the focus of attention. Before Dake could speak, Lily had already turned around and said excitedly, I found a secret. I see. Is this the secret you were talking about? Claire said with some regret. I only broke through to level 50, so I'm not qualified to participate in this topic. But the level bosses of the underground city are originally stronger the lower you go. And when they reach the limit, they will naturally become gods. Since we haven't been able to see the level of the underground city, it's not wrong to assume that there is a level boss below that is close to gods. Professor Cheongsi crossed his arms and said, It seems that you all think this is God's heart. It can only be God. Professor Shi-Erfu raised his head and looked at the pitch-black chains that hung the heart, deep in thought. Professor Ka-Zayer said, Your hypothesis is interesting. But how can a heart be a level boss? Unless, it's still in the process of being created. Ka-Zayer suddenly froze and said, The underground city is creating its god. The magical creatures couldn't interrupt the discussion at all. Professor Shi-Erfu pondered for a short while and shook his head. Let's follow the normal train of thought. Why can't someone seal a god's heart in our underground city in the past? And then the hidden dimension accidentally opened, causing its aura to leak out. I agree with the second half of the sentence, Professor Ka-Zayer said. The underground city hadn't had such a change for so many years. Now that it suddenly appeared, there must be a decisive difference. If there wasn't any external force, it could only be a coincidence. As for how the huge heart appeared in the underground city, it would take a lot of time to research and discover. Professor Ka-Zayer straightened his body subconsciously, and his wrinkled face was full of excitement. It was obvious that this huge heart had given him a great passion for research. However, from the perspective of the Academy, the existence of such unstable factors was not a good thing. Therefore, Professor Sylph's expression became more and more serious. As for the other professors, Claire was no longer a professor. Professor Cheongsi wasn't very interested in the heart. Professor Lily was full of curiosity. Professor Nini was still in a daze. At this time, the magical creatures had retreated to the corner and formed a small circle. Azalia and Dolores whispered to each other. The other 4 demonic creatures chimed in. They were surprised by the words of the professors. They didn't understand why the professors were so sure that the huge heart was the heart of God. And they didn't understand why they were so calm after coming to this conclusion. They were originally heroic figures, but the change of times had obviously created a generation gap between their thinking and the people of today. Based on their reverence for God, they couldn't imagine the actions of the professors. Therefore, they were even more secretive about the professors. The beating of the huge heart put a lot of pressure on the magical creatures. They didn't stay inside for too long. And the professors didn't stay any longer after they left. In order to research the huge heart, the first thing to do was to find the hierarchical position of the projection, then trace it back to the origin of the heart from the projection. But this was difficult to do in the short term. Even Professor Ka-Zayer didn't rashly choose to start the research at this time. After all, it was related to God, so he needed to be more careful. Also, due to the existence of the hidden space. If he accidentally destroyed the projection of the huge heart, it would easily cause the space to collapse, and then it would be even more difficult to trace it back. On the other hand, today's harvest was completely beyond their expectations. They needed to return to the academy as soon as possible and inform Principal Erdii about what happened today. We need at least one door key or door crystal to go to the 99th floor. When they returned to the conference room, Professor Shi-Erfu quickly said, "From the 99th floor to the first floor, only door key 1, or door crystal 1, were needed." They had both of these items. But if they wanted to come to the 99th floor again, door key 99, or door crystal 99, was very necessary. "I have a door key to the 99th floor." Azalea expressed her sincerity. After Professor Shi-Erfu accepted the door key, 99, he asked gently, "Are all your members here?" Azalea shook her head and said, "We have already started to gather the members since yesterday, but there are still some people outside. Most of them are in other floors, and we won't be able to summon them back in a short period of time. But I will have Brothers Walker stay here and continue to gather members. He will come here once a week, and he should be able to bring all the members who are willing to leave. As for those who are unwilling," Professor Shi-Erfu said calmly, "I will make them willing." Azalea laughed dryly and did not say anything else. She was satisfied with the agreement she signed with the academy, and she could not wait to leave this damned dungeon. As for the unlucky members who were originally evil, she could only wish them good luck. Next, she asked Strategist to give the list of members to Professor Shi-Erfu, and then she brought all the members to an open space for the professors to inspect. Excluding those who chose to leave and those who did not return, there were nearly 50 members left in the base, which was half of the Abyss organization. Not all of these monsters were good people, but they were basically harmless. With Professor Kaze around, they could not lie at all. Once he found a monster with evil intentions, he could immediately find it. The entire inspection process lasted until midnight. Azalea passed down the contents of the agreement, and most of the monsters were very cooperative. When the inspection was over, all of the monsters had already carried their luggage and were ready to return to the surface. For them, this was something they had always yearned for. They were grateful for the tolerance and kindness of the Shung Malian Academy. Of course, all of this was based on the fact that they did not have much choice. The pressure of the academy professors was too strong. 2 o'clock in the morning. The professors brought nearly 50 monsters to the meeting room on the 99th floor. Then 2 professors opened the crystal door to the first floor. At 2 o'clock in the morning, there were basically no students in the meeting room on the first floor. The monsters went through the portal one by one and gathered in the meeting room on the first floor. Professor Shi-Erfu reminded them of the rules after leaving the dungeon, especially not to yell and shout. Then he led the monsters through the magic door and went to the surface. At this time, the night was dark, the stars were like fireflies, and the full moon illuminated the starry sky. When the monsters looked up, they could not help but howl. But the whole square was shrouded in a silent spell in the next moment. Professor Shi-Erfu sternly glared at the monster, and it whimpered like a puppy. But aside from this minor flaw, the monsters had indeed welcomed a new life. If the Shung Malian Academy was really as fair and tolerant as the legends said, Dake Dimming, who had put on his backpack again, went through the magic door that was like a water curtain and stepped on the surface. He touched the fairy substitute that he kept close to his body, and while he was glad that he did not have to use it, he could not help but sigh about the experience of the past 2 days. Although he did not play a role from the beginning to the end, other than tying up Li, the experience of traveling with the professors would still have a great impact on his life. His vision became broader, and his future path became clearer. He also gained a lot of knowledge related to the dungeon adventure. He also clearly knew that there was a god's heart hidden in the dungeon. The beating sound of the huge heart was still echoing in his ears, making him more convinced of Eudora's prophecy. Whether the god's heart was sealed in the dungeon or generated by the dungeon itself, it was a sign of the recovery of the gods. The curtain was about to open, and it was far from being comparable to the Demon King. In the original game, these events were most likely just background, or they were left behind for the start of the second game. Dake didn't know the details, so he could only speculate. But he knew very well that reality was not a game. He couldn't hide in the academy for a lifetime like the characters in the game. Even if the sky fell, There were tall people to hold it up. But what if one day, the tall people couldn't hold it up? Dake couldn't really watch those tall people hold it up in front while he shrank behind. He couldn't do those things. When the monsters had completely calmed down, the professors took them away from the square at the entrance of the dungeon and prepared to go to the vast dense forest. Dake didn't follow them. After he picked up Xiong Bao, he planned to return to the dormitory. If he couldn't enter the dormitory, he would go to the Magical Animal Society on the clock tower to stay for the night. It was only 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and there was still a long weekend. Do you want to go back to the dormitory? Lily saw through his thoughts. He thought for a moment and said, "Can you help me?" Lily hugged his other arm and couldn't hide her smile. Of course. Then she waved to the other professors, flapped her wings, and flew up. Without disturbing anyone, Lily took Dake through the wall and entered dormitory 301. Sit for a while. The familiar environment made Dake relax quickly. He summoned Kettle Pot, put the fruit into its shell, then took out the teacup to wash it, and prepared to make 2 cups of fresh juice. Of course, Lily didn't refuse. She sat on Dake's bed without any hesitation and said, "Do you have anything to ask?" Dake didn't have anything to ask, but since Lily said so, how could he not give her face? So Dake asked curiously, "Othbrook, I mean that shadow rat, how will the professors deal with it?" Lily blinked, then raised her hand and made a pulling gesture on her temple in front of him. Dake suddenly understood. "Pull out the memory?" Lily said in a light tone. "If it's Kazair, he'll probably do that. Although those monsters aren't the same as the original body of the memory, they do have the original body's memory. If the original body's memory isn't so wonderful, pulling it out is the best way. Of course, this will be very troublesome." In other words, if it wasn't Kazair, they might have used a simpler, more convenient, or even a more permanent method. Dake understood and didn't ask again. Lose the memory, or lose the life? If he had to choose between the two, he would have a hard time choosing. But from the standpoint of the academy, the professors couldn't allow a monster with the memory of the Plague Lord to live normally. Just washing away its memory was already the greatest kindness they could do. Dake handed Lily a cup of apple juice and asked again, "Actually, I'm very curious. What did you and Professor Kazair do to the Golden Mermaid?" Lily took a sip of apple juice and said casually, "Actually, it's nothing. We just helped it shape a temporary personality, so it gained the sensitivity of a golem and temporarily recovered the ability to cry. After all, things like tears have to flow naturally to be effective. Physical tears can't be used." Dake recalled Professor Kazair's awkward expression and couldn't help but ask, "So, what kind of personality did Professor Kazair create for it?" Lily said with a trembling little finger, "Look at the Golden Mermaid. Doesn't it look like a little crying bag?" Dake touched his nose and said, "Indeed." "Then it is," Lily said. "It looks like a little crybaby, so Kazair created a crybaby personality for it, and made it mistakenly think that Kazair was a kind old father. Then it witnessed its father's death in its mind. For materials like tears, their special power usually came from the power of the soul. Therefore, emotional guidance was very important. The monster boss in the dungeon had the body structure of all living creatures, but it didn't have a consciousness. Through research, Professor Kazair transplanted the virtual personality into the brain of the Golden Mermaid, but he didn't expect that the Golden Mermaid's self-awareness had already begun to develop. Thinking about it now, the Golden Mermaid Asaria Patis's current personality might have been affected by the virtual personality and retained the memories of that experience. However, that memory might have brought it a deeper level of fear. It was already very restrained that it didn't call Professor Kazair Daddy on the spot. After knowing the truth, Dake couldn't help but open his mouth and say, "No wonder Professor Kazair didn't want to look at it directly. Okay, I should go." Lily drank the last mouthful of apple juice and licked the corner of her mouth. Dake took the cup from her hand and said, "Go ahead, good night." Lily laughed and flew up. "Good night, see you tomorrow." Dake waved his hand and said, "See you tomorrow." Professor Lily went through the wall and silently flew out of the Noble Academy's tower. With her personality, she must have flown into the forest. Dake walked to the balcony and watched her fly away. He then returned to the room to summon Paradise, and let the magician's secretary summon the magician fairies. He casually picked up a book and soaked it in the bathtub. There were originally a large number of powerful creatures living in the forest of the Shungmalian Academy. Only 50 monster bosses living in the forest were far from enough to change the ecology of the forest. It was just that finding a suitable place to live in the forest and building a perfect facility wasn't something that could be done overnight. However, in the long run, these monsters would be assimilated into the Shungmalian Academy sooner or later. If all went well, they might be able to build a special place that was different from the Traveler's Street. Dake planned to wait until the monsters settled down before finding a chance to go in and take a look. Those monster bosses were still very attractive to him. The night passed. After Dake woke up, he took out his notebook and slowly recalled the experiences of the past 2 days. He then slowly pondered over it and gradually sorted out his thoughts. He removed himself from the things that were beyond his ability and temporarily returned to the normal path of learning. After that, he took out the 3,000 items, 8,000 crafting methods, and began to search for the bronze mirror. There weren't many items left that were supposed to be made into item cards. Other than the clown mask, there was the bronze mirror. Other than that, items like the gravity boots might not have much use in a magic duel, but they could still be used for daily training. However, the priority of the bronze mirror was obviously higher. The 3,000 items, 8,000 crafting methods, didn't have an item similar to the bronze mirror. However, Dake diverged his thoughts and found the method to make the cursed mask and the mirror of wisdom. The cursed mask was a mask with a cursed effect. It could make the person who wore the mask lose their rationality and gradually petrify in a frenzy. The mirror of wisdom was a mirror that was good at lying. It was good at deceiving the holder, letting the holder see the beauty of himself, and give the holder praise according to his heart. It made the holder indulge in a false perfection, and eventually self-destruct. After careful consideration, Dake decided to try to combine the refining methods of these 2 items, and use it on the bronze mirror. Anyway, he wasn't afraid of failure. Success was a big gain. Everything was for improvement. However, the process of combining the 2 methods into one was much more difficult than he imagined. From morning to afternoon, except for the occasional distraction, he was carefully studying, but the progress was very slow. Near evening, in order to prevent the lack of materials after the experiment began, Dake had to go to Traveler's Street to buy some materials that might be needed. Recently, his expenses were getting bigger and bigger, and his credit reserve was decreasing visibly. Finally, he felt a sense of crisis. After he returned and sat down again, he picked up the materials again. It was as though he had suddenly been enlightened. Flashes of inspiration kept flashing, and he had advanced more than half of his progress in one breath. When Aurora knocked on the door and entered, he could almost see the end. "Are you studying the refining of item cards again?" Aurora asked curiously as she put the all-nourishing soup on the table. Dake put down his pen and sighed. "If I don't study something, it's like I'm missing something. I always want to make the best use of it," Aurora said with a smile. "Then let's eat something first before continuing the research. When did you get back?" 2 in the morning, Dake said. Aurora couldn't hold back her curiosity. "Didn't you pass the curfew? How did you get in?" Dake said with a smile. "The curfew isn't for professors." "Oh." Aurora thought about it and said, "Let me guess. It was Professor Li, wasn't it?" "You guessed it right away." Dake picked up the bowl, filled it with soup and drank it. His whole body felt comfortable. When Aurora saw how comfortable he looked, she felt much better too. She said, "You went into the dungeon with the professors this time, didn't you?" Dake raised his head a little and asked curiously, "How did you know? I don't think I told you." Aurora covered her mouth and laughed softly. "Someone saw you. Do you know how much attention you're getting?" Dake thought back and seemed to have met a 3-person team. He couldn't help but smile helplessly. "Do you know the Mirror of Wisdom? You're like my Mirror of Wisdom." 22 of 127. My family suddenly came over with a matchmaking number. In the end, they got the number and name wrong. In short, It was quite troublesome and wasted a lot of time. But I still wrote 10,000. Keep it up. Begging for monthly votes. Begging for razor blades. Chapter 619. 2 days later, in the evening, Dake finally came up with a feasible idea based on the refining method of the cursed mask and the mirror of wisdom. Even though he could not make a mistake because he only had one bronze mirror, he had made a simulation based on various data and confirmed that there were no mistakes. After everything was ready, he chose to conduct the experiment on Tuesday night. The bronze mirror was essentially a replica of the Medusa's mirror. Medusa was a snake-haired banshee. Her upper body was human and her lower body was a snake. Every strand of her hair was a slender snake. That was why she was called a snake-haired banshee. According to legend, Medusa was born with the ability to petrify. No matter who it was, they would be petrified as long as they looked into her eyes. Another monster with similar abilities was the cockatrice, which was commonly seen in the underground city. The cockatrice's eyes could shoot out gray petrification rays and turn the target into stone. Remember the website, VIP can't you? VIP, however, the petrification abilities of the cockatrice and Medusa were worlds apart. Their powers were not on the same level at all. As long as the enchanters were prepared beforehand, they could use cloth to block the petrification rays and avoid being petrified by the cockatrice. Even if they were petrified accidentally, they could use the lime toad's saliva or the petrification removal potion to remove the petrification from the cockatrice. The concoction of the anti-petrification potion was not difficult. The core ingredient, the snake tongue flower, could be found around the Medusa statue on the 10th floor of the dungeon. Dake had made many petrification removal potions in advance to test the bronze mirror's petrification ability. Medusa's petrification was almost impossible to remove. Of course, the bronze mirror was only a replica. After testing, its petrification ability was only slightly stronger than the cockatrice's. It could also be removed with the petrification removal potion. Dake's goal was to further enhance the bronze mirror's petrification ability in the process of refining it into an item card. Therefore, he referred to the refining method of the cursed mask and prepared to add 3 points of greed during the refining process. One could not catch a wolf without risking one's child. He could not be too stingy. Greed's symbol was Saturn, and its main attributes were rock and ground. At least in terms of attributes, it was compatible with petrification. However, whether or not it was truly useful would have to wait until the end of the experiment to find out. He used the dark spirit art to quickly calm himself down, and then focused on the experiment. The softener of the bronze mirror was based on the softener of the mirror of wisdom. The ink used to write the magical language was the reference for the curse mask. The most important part, the magic guide language, was the combination of the two items and the activation incantation of the bronze mirror. Claire had used that line of incantation to activate the bronze mirror and make it show the power of petrification. After that, Dake recorded the activation incantation, and now it was useful. With softener, ink, and magic language, the experiment was on the right track. After a full 3 hours, Dark finally pushed the entire experiment to the stage of smelting materials. As he added the supplementary materials, he observed the reaction of the number 4 refining formation. In order to ensure that the bronze mirror's petrification ability was not reduced, Dake used a large number of cockatrices for the supplementary materials and focused on the curse mask's refining method. The reaction of the refining formation was quite stable, and the materials were integrated into the light formation bit by bit. After that, Dake finally put the softened bronze mirror into the refining formation. In fact, this was the most important step. Whether the refining idea was correct or not depended on whether the refining formation could successfully refine the bronze mirror. Fortunately, his learning and experiments during this period of time were effective, and the final result did not deviate too much from his original plan. After he hurriedly added the 2 supplementary materials, he finally successfully refined the bronze mirror. During the process, he did put in 3 points of greed. 3 points of greed were enough to make the greed emblem appear. However, with the addition of greed, the upper limit of the refining formation suddenly increased. Because it was only a very small amount, he did not choose to add the fourth point of greed. Instead, he chose some supplementary materials to fill it up, and finally, the refining formation was almost saturated. After gaining even more refining experience, Jihong finally completed the final refining. When the internal reaction of the magic card finally stopped, Dake finally let out a sigh of relief. He used a pair of tweezers to pick it out of the gray viscous liquid and put it under the tap to wash it. The water rushed down with a sound of hua la la. The magic card gradually revealed its true appearance. Dake saw the mirror image that appeared on the card at a glance. The original bronze mirror was a circular mirror, and the bronze frame that wrapped the mirror was engraved with very complicated and beautiful flower decorations. But this magic card that had just been refined had 4 snakes crawling on top of its frame. The 4 slender bronze snakes formed a new flower decoration, and it added a mysterious and strange aura to the mirror. However, after Dake saw the 4 snakes, he was delighted. He immediately realized that this bronze mirror was closer to the Medusa's mirror, after being refined into a item card. As a replica, the more similar it was, the better. Phew! The little devil beast suddenly flew down from the bird stand and stopped on his shoulder, looking at the item card curiously. Did it succeed? It tilted its head and asked. In order to refine this item card, the little devil beast had put in a lot of effort, so it was especially concerned. Dake took a deep breath and said, "I'll only know after I check it out." Then he used his fingers to grab the magic card and infused it with magic to get the initial feedback. Card name: Bronze Snake Mirror. Type: Item Card. Effect 1: Spirit +3, Rationality -3. Effect 2: Comes with the ultimate skill, Bronze Snake. Effect 3: Ultimate skill, Petrifying Gaze. 3 effects, and 2 of them are ultimate skills. Dake's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but take a closer look, but then he frowned. After the bronze mirror was refined into an item card, it became the Bronze Snake Mirror. It had a total of 3 effects. However, the first effect was half positive and half negative. Spirit +3 not only gave the wielder an additional boost to spirit, but it also made the wielder more spirited and emotional. Although this effect wasn't very useful in a magic duel, it was useful for a magus. However, the second half of the first effect was Rationality -3. Rationality -3. The negative effect of the Bronze Snake Lens was actually within his expectations. After all, whether it was the Curse Mask or the Mirror of Wisdom, both were not friendly to the holder. Spirit +3 and Rationality -3 seemed contradictory, but in fact, there was no conflict. Losing one's rationality in excitement meant becoming chaotic. This was in line with the Curse Mask's effect. Moreover, after the holder became chaotic, it was easier for the holder to be deceived by the mirror until they became lost. This was in line with the Mirror of Wisdom. However, if this was the only side effect, Dake wasn't worried. He pondered for a moment, and then looked at the last 2 effects. First was the effect 2. This Bronze Snake Lens came with 2 Surekill skills, which were relatively rare among item cards. And one of these 2 ultimate skills was the Bronze Snake. From the name of the ultimate skill, it should be a skill to summon a snake. However, after Dake injected more magic to check, he found that this wasn't the case. Bronze Snake. A bronze snake is sleeping in the Bronze Snake Mirror. Settled desire will awaken the bronze snake from its sleep, and those with weak willpower will be lost in the whispers of the bronze snake. The effect of the Mirror of Wisdom seemed to have been perfectly transferred to the Bronze Snake Mirror. Dake didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook the magic card, and suddenly his heart skipped a beat. The whispers of the bronze snake. Could it be that not only the holder can hear it? From the description, this idea was very possible. If this was the case, then the Bronze Snake's ultimate skill could be used. Normal magic elves might not be confused by the Bronze Snake's whispers. After all, they didn't have the ability to think. However, if this ultimate skill was used on intelligent beings, it might be able to subtly make them lose themselves. Thinking of this, Dake couldn't wait to summon the bronze snake mirror and try it out. But he held back. Then he continued to look at the last effect 3. This effect 3 came with the ultimate skill, petrifying gaze. It was the easiest skill to understand among the 3 effects. Dake looked at it. Petrifying gaze. The 4 snakes on the frame of the bronze snake mirror will come to life after the petrifying gaze is activated, and those who are stared at by them will be turned into stone. As for the extent of the petrifying gaze's petrification effect, he would have to experiment to find out. Dake took a light breath and said, "It seems like the refining is successful. Wait for me to summon it." In the name of Dake Dimeng, I summoned the bronze snake mirror. As soon as the summoning ended, a bronze mirror with 4 small snakes crawling on it appeared in front of Dake. He reached out and grasped it. He could feel his spirit, which was originally dispirited due to the long period of experimenting, rising slightly. As for the little bit of rationality that was removed, it was almost negligible to him, who was constantly fighting against the great sin. As long as it wasn't a negative effect like greed plus 3, it wouldn't affect him. He picked up the mirror and looked at it carefully, then stared at the bronze snake mirror's surface. Suddenly, the surface of the mirror rippled like the surface of a water surface. A large snake with bronze scales slowly opened its inverted snake eyes in the mirror world. Hiss! A faint whisper suddenly entered his ears. Dake looked around and noticed that the magic elves who had been watching him all frowned at the same time. He immediately realized that the bronze snake's whispers were wide range. As for how wide its range could be, at least none of the magic elves in the room were immune. Dake stared at the bronze snake's reflection in the mirror, and suddenly asked, "Bronze snake? Bronze snake, bronze snake, who is the most handsome person in the world?" It's you. After answering his own question, Dake smiled and was about to try to make the bronze snake disappear. Hiss! All of a sudden he thought of a possibility. If I can master this bronze snake mirror, to the point where I can control the bronze snake, can I use this bronze snake to send messages over a wide range? He didn't need to open his mouth or speak. His message was conveyed through the bronze snake to the ears of everyone around him. This kind of long-distance communication ability was actually very useful. After this, I have to give it a try. Dake couldn't help but decide. When he no longer looked at the bronze snake mirror with a lustful gaze, the bronze snake gradually closed its eyes and fell into a deep sleep again. After Dake mastered the technique to make it disappear, he took out a row of anti-petrification potions and placed them on the table. Then he let the little fiend fly in front of him. Then he injected magic and activated the bronze snake mirror's ultimate skill, petrification gaze. In the next second, the 4 little snakes on the mirror frame opened their snake eyes at the same time and stared at the little fiend in front of them. The little fiend was already mentally prepared and immediately used its wings to cover its body. However, when the petrification gaze's light petrified its wings, it also petrified its body at the same time. It was obvious that this level of protection was completely useless. There was still cloth hanging on one of its wings, but this time, it still didn't have the effect of blocking. After it had completely turned into a stone statue, Dake picked up a anti-petrification potion and sprinkled it on its body. However, the little fiend's petrified shell only showed signs of melting. No amount of anti-petrification potion could remove the petrification. As usual, Dake carried out a resistance test on the petrified little fiend. The result was that after it turned into stone, the little fiend's defense had increased significantly. According to the records, monsters called gargoyles would petrify themselves to resist attacks. The bronze snake mirror's petrification gaze seemed to be able to be used in this way. After this, Dake didn't immediately remove the summon to get the little fiend out of the petrification state. He calculated the time and waited patiently. After about 5 minutes, the petrification state on the little fiend's body was automatically removed. The petrification gaze's cooldown was a full hour. Obviously, the bronze snake mirror's petrification gaze is closer to the Medusa's petrification ability in all aspects and is different from the cockatrice's petrification ability. In terms of petrification strength, There is also an obvious increase. Normal antipetrification potions can no longer remove it immediately. As for the duration of the petrification state, it has been shortened to 5 minutes. This is in line with the phenomenon that usually occurs when an item is turned into an item card. All in all, the bronze snake mirror has been greatly strengthened and has more potential to be developed. Dake wrote in his notebook. The refinement this time was undoubtedly very successful. Item cards like this didn't have too many equipment restrictions. Basically, any magic elf that could be carried could be equipped. The high-intensity petrification effect would definitely allow it to shine in a magic duel. Then the only item left to be refined into an item card is the clown mask. Dake couldn't help but ponder. In his prediction, the clown mask, after being refined into an item card, would have a special ability that could be forcefully equipped on the opponent. This would turn it into a control-type magic card like the bronze snake mirror. The research on the refinement method of the curse mask also gave him a clue on how to refine the clown mask. In short, as long as he could research the refinement method of the clown mask before October, he would be able to make it in time for the Golden Cup. It wasn't a big problem. It was a pity that he wouldn't be able to make it in time for this year's Halloween event. Although there was still half a month before Halloween, the festive atmosphere had already spread. The first-year students who had never celebrated Halloween after the academy, the senior students, who were short on credits, were eyeing the Halloween event covetously to harvest credits. The men and women who were spying on the masquerade party, they had already started preparing. However, on this year's Halloween, there was no church, no moon goddess, and no Princess Eliza. Even Professor Kazair wasn't there. Dake only realized that Kazair didn't have pumpkin sauce on him when he bumped into him in the castle. This was completely impossible for Professor Kazair, who had started preparing for the event a month earlier than last year. In summary, Dake could only conclude that the person in charge of this year's Halloween event had been changed. Under normal circumstances, even if the person in charge was changed, with Professor Kazair's personality, he would most likely help out. However, the huge heart in the underground city had probably completely absorbed his attention. Without Professor Kazair's Halloween event, Dake didn't know why, but he suddenly had a very ominous premonition. He shook his head violently and forcibly shook off this feeling. Most of the professors in the academy were still reliable, so there wouldn't be too big of a loophole. This year's Halloween would definitely be a safe and joyful one. Instead of thinking about this, it was better to think about what to wear at the masquerade party. It couldn't be the Prince of Night costume that he wore last year, right? Dake couldn't help but ponder. Even if this week's weekend was included, there were only 2 weekends left before Halloween. If he didn't think about it quickly, he would have to wear the Prince of Night costume again. With this in mind, Dake walked onto the duel stage. Today was October 18th, Friday. Silver Cup. Continue. Good morning. It's another day of hard work. Monthly votes, Blades. Chapter 620. The autumn sun shone down diagonally, and the duel stage was dyed with a layer of bright orange. The cheers of the audience were still like a tidal wave, and the students were whispering in the ring. On the red platform, Dake Dimming was putting the adjusted cards into the card slot. The bright sun shone on his face, and his green eyes were like amber. The Silver Cup required the contestants to participate in at least 10 matches. This was also Professor Cheongsi's requirement for the students. Therefore, even if Dake didn't want to participate in the quarterfinals, he had to follow Professor Cheongsi's request and complete the 10 matches. In fact, he had already received the new schedule on Tuesday. Perhaps it was because he had applied for a postponement last week, so the duel club had compressed 2 weeks of matches into one. Therefore, he needed to complete the remaining 5 points competition matches this weekend. To him, this was not a difficult task. The matches were divided into 3 days, and the interval between each match was more than an hour. It was a friendly arrangement. After Dake activated the card table, he looked up at the opposite platform. Remember, https://mvip can't you? VIP on the blue platform was Rentgen from the House of Nobles. In other words, this was an internal fight in the House of Nobles. Dark and Rankin had a good relationship, at least a relationship where they could exchange a few words. However, he didn't pay much attention to Rankin's results. His impression was that she was above average. In short, he could relax a little in this duel, but he couldn't be too careless. "Hey, Dake." Rankin saw Dake look up and quickly greeted him. He looked a little nervous, and there were even beads of sweat on his freckled nose. His good friend Civet was cheering for him loudly in the ring of spectators, which made him even more nervous. Dake looked at Rankin and asked, "What's wrong, Rankin?" Rankin opened her mouth and said, Nothing. Let's start the duel." Dake nodded and smiled. "Then let's start." Rankin wanted to tell Dake to go easy on him, at least to save him some face, but she didn't do so in the end. As a member of the House of Nobles, if he showed weakness at this time, he would be looked down upon. He took a deep breath and decided to go all out. No matter what the final result was, he could not make a fool of himself. The second-year students of the aristocratic academy sat in the ring and watched the duel with relaxed expressions. Since it was a civil war between the aristocrats, there was no conflict between factions. Moreover, they couldn't figure out where Dake would lose. The highlight of this duel was probably how long Dake's opponent could last. Even Civet, who was cheering with all his might, was probably thinking the same thing. Deanna and Luosi were even fighting with each other. Beep. Amidst such a warm atmosphere, the referee suddenly blew the whistle. Both players entered the preparation stage. Then, the cards on the table began to automatically shuffle. Then the 30-second countdown of the preparation stage appeared in the projection above the venue. Both contestants drew their cards at the same time. Without saying much, Dark quickly took out the 5 magic cards and placed them in his left hand. He quickly unfolded them. Then he lowered his head slightly and looked at the cards in his hand. Warhorn, Trash Slime, Greed 3, Lion Beast, Little Snorlax. Due to the strong protest of the magic elves, Dake did not use Bliss or Pride as the theme to build the deck this time. He put most of the magic elves into the deck. Together with the newly crafted item cards, he had a total of 40 magic cards. However, this did not mean that this set of 40 cards would be weaker than a set of 20 cards. The number of magic cards in the deck was less, and the biggest advantage was that it could reduce the number of accidents. However, at the same time, it would also weaken the fault tolerance. Once the deck was targeted, it would be impossible to turn the tables. In fact, 20 magic cards were indeed too few. It made sense for a regular magic duel to use 40 magic cards. Of course, in this duel, there was not much difference between 20 cards and 40 cards. Dake looked at the magic cards in his hand, and a variety of battle strategies immediately appeared in his mind. "I didn't expect to get this, Warhorn, in the first round." Dake smiled. "Let's not look at this item card first. Among the 5 cards in my hand, there are 2 3-star magic elves that can be summoned at the start. Whether it's Trash Slime or Little Snorlax, I can use Greed 3 to evolve them. Currently there are 2 routes. One is to summon Little Snorlax and use Greed 3 to evolve it into Snorlax. The other way is to summon a Trash Slime, then use Greed 3 to evolve it into a Greed Slime 2. Then use Divide and Succeed to create a sacrifice to summon a Lion Beast." Dake thought for a while and made his choice. The 30-second countdown passed in a flash. The 2 contestants began to cast their usual summoning spells at the same time. "In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Trash Slime by magic." Although the summoning of Snorlax was faster and more direct, Dake still chose to summon Trash Slime at the start. The main reason was that his opponent's usual summoning speed was indeed not fast enough. He did not have to worry that he would be killed instantly if he summoned Trash Slime at the start. Although Snorlax was powerful enough, its sure kill skill was completely of the ground type. Heavy Stomp and Earthquake could not cause any damage to aerial units. Moreover, Snorlax's movement speed was really slow. As a parent, Dake also needed to pay attention to the mental health of the magic elves. Trash Slime needed a stage to prove itself more than Little Snorlax. He needed to build up its confidence. This duel was just right. As expected, when Dake completed his summoning, Renkin was still trying hard to cast her usual summoning spell. Even when Dake began to cast his second summoning spell, Renkin was still trying hard. There was a relatively big gap between the two in terms of magic technology. In fact, it was difficult to rely on magic cards or strategies to make up for the gap. In the summoning area of the red team, after Trash Slime appeared in the summoning light, it instantly opened its eyes wide and looked around. It then immediately realized that it was the first to be summoned by the red team. For it, this was completely an exception. It almost thought that its master's brain was damaged. However, when Greed 3's light shone down from above, its heart calmed down. At this time, there were already magic elves appearing in the summoning area of the blue team. Trash Slime felt the power of greed continuously pouring into its body, and its inner confidence was also rising. Finally, it evolved into a second-tier magic elf in the blue-purple light. Greed Slime 2. Card name, Greed Slime 2. Type, Elf card, race, elemental. Attribute, grass. Magic power, 3000. Attack, 0 defense, 2000. Ultimate skill, greed instinct divide and conquer photosynthesis. Then according to the established strategy, it turned around and swallowed the red magic ball into its body. A full 2000 points of defense was enough to help it withstand most of the damage. At least, it would be difficult for the first-tier magic elf summoned by Renkin to break through its defense. Greed Slime, divide and conquer, 5. On the red team's platform, Dake said calmly after putting down Greed 3's magic card. Gurgle. Greed Slime 2 was a little excited. It then took a deep breath, causing its already large body to become even larger until a larger space appeared in its body. Then 2 Greed Slime and 1 Trash Slime split out from its body and rolled around in the space. After seeing this scene, Dake couldn't help but smile. Directly splitting 1 and 2 stars in the body was also one of the established strategies. It seemed that Greed Slime 2 executed it well. After that, when the cooldown of the normal summoning spell was over, he began to chant the sacrificial summoning spell. During this process, Renkin, who was on the blue team's platform, couldn't just stand there and wait. After summoning the first magic elf, she immediately gave the order to attack. The magic elf that appeared in the blue team's summoning area was like a leopard, with a sharp horn shaped like lightning on its head. Its name was Thunder Leopard, and it was Renkin's proudest 3-star magic elf. Card name, Thunder Leopard. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, bird beast. Attribute, lightning. Magic 1500, attack, 1400, defense, 1200. Ultimate skill, lightning speed lightning pulse. Although Thunder Leopard's attack and defense weren't at the pinnacle of 3 stars, it was full of magic and its ultimate skill was very practical. Renkin took a deep breath and unleashed her aura. Thunder Leopard, use lightning speed to charge. After hearing its master's order, Thunder Leopard charged without hesitation. Blue electric currents appeared on its 4 limbs, and its muscle strength was stimulated, causing its speed to soar in an instant. It crossed the 120-meter field in the blink of an eye. Renkin saw the opportunity and suddenly shouted, "Lightning Pulse!" Thunder Leopard approached Greedy Slime 2, a few meters away. It lowered its head and aimed its sharp horn at Greedy Slime 2. Then, amidst the crackling sounds, a pulse of concentrated electric current was suddenly launched from the sharp horn. Thunder Leopard didn't slow down at all, and its sharp horn fiercely stabbed into Greedy Slime 2's body. Boom! Greedy Slime 2 took the full damage from Lightning Pulse, and because of Divide Works, it consumed 1,000 points of magic, and it didn't decrease at all. On the platform, Renkin's eyes widened. Lightning Pulse's power wasn't weak, and it could even be said to be very strong. However, Greedy Slime 2 was a grass-type monster even though it was hard to tell from its appearance. Grass-type elves had a relatively strong immunity against Thunder-type ultimate skills. In addition to Greedy Slime 2's 2,000 points of defense, this powerful ultimate skill couldn't break through its defense. In the next moment, Thunder Leopard, which had plunged into Greedy Slime 2's body, was actually rebounded after all the impact was absorbed. Although this attack was accompanied by the increase in strength from the acceleration, It still couldn't break through its defense. Greedy slime too. S body structure allowed it to be immune to some physical attacks. Thunder leopard couldn't cause any damage to it at all. In the name of Dake dimming, 2 greedy slime eye and 1 trash slime are offered as sacrifices to summon lion beast. After the chanting of the sacrificial summoning spell was completed, Dake slightly raised the lion beast magic card in his hand. From greedy slime to S body, 3 rays of white light shot out at the same time, intersecting with the white light from the lion beast card in the air. A huge sacrificial summoning circle appeared in everyone's eyes. Roar! The 5-star magic fairy, lion beast, slowly walked out from the sacrificial summoning circle. Lion beast, I'll leave the rest to you. After Dake finished speaking, he didn't stop. Instead, he waited for the cooldown of the summoning spell to be over, and continued to summon the last magic fairy, Snorlax. The purpose of summoning Snorlax wasn't to be cautious, but to let it out for some fresh air. Calming. After Snorlax was summoned, it was obviously very happy. However, when it opened its eyes, it saw that Lion Beast was punching a leopard that was surrounded by lightning. Beast King Punch. The energy wave in the shape of a lion shattered Thunder Leopard. Punch. Snorlax looked at the empty field opposite it and couldn't help but tilt its head and sit on the ground. It was already giving Dake a lot of face by not falling asleep on the spot. Next, let's try Warhorn. Dake looked at the last card in his hand and couldn't help but smile. However, Renkin on the opposite side couldn't smile at all. He was now standing on the blue team's platform and felt like he was in jail. Dake had already sacrificed a second-tier magic fairy, but he hadn't even summoned his second magic fairy yet. After Thunder Leopard was killed by Lion Beast, his blue magic crystal ball on the field was no longer guarded. When he felt that something was wrong and wanted to control the magic crystal ball to fly and dodge, he suddenly felt another magic power acting on the blue magic crystal ball. There was no more suspense in the duel after that. Dake released his magic power and forced the blue magic crystal ball to the ground. Renkin obviously had a great distance advantage in controlling the magic crystal ball, but she was still successfully suppressed by Dake. Dake didn't even summon Warhorn, and the life enchantment on the blue magic crystal ball was shattered by Lion Beast's 2 punches. The blue team's contestant Renkin had no ability to resist at all. Good morning. Today is also a day of all-nighters. Please guarantee the minimum monthly votes. Please guarantee the minimum blades. Chapter 621. Before the applause stopped, it started again. Greedy Slime 2 shook twice as if it wasn't satisfied yet. Then it spat out the red cube ball. Then it hopped to the side of Snorlax, and with a forceful bounce, it landed on Snorlax's belly. Ouch! Wheeze. Snorlax continued to sleep on its belly. Greedy Slime 2 pouted its mouth. Damn it. On the red platform, Dake Diming's Elfin smiled. Then it picked up the magic cards and collected them one by one. Then, it packed up the cards and walked down the platform. Although Renkin's courage was commendable, she still needed to work harder. Website: https://m/vipcanshu. VIP. After he walked out of the platform, he went to Deanna and Luosi and sat down to watch the duel with them. Of course, other than the duel of the Silver Cup, there were other duels of higher grades going on at the same time in the stadium. While he was watching the duels, he continued to learn the knowledge of making item cards. Switching between the two could effectively stop the growth of Greedy. During this period, Deanna and Luosi both had their duels, and they both won. Just like how Dake had been learning and making new magic cards, they did not stop improving. Whether it was Deanna or Luosi, both of them were trying their best to make up for the shortcomings of their cards. 2 hours later, Dake put down his book and said to Deanna, "It's my turn again." Deanna bit her pen and stared at the math homework on her knees. She muttered without looking up, "Go, go." Dake looked at her sad face and shook his head. Then he walked to the contestants' passage alone. This was his second duel today. The other 3 duels would be held tomorrow and the day after. As he rose, he saw that Pitan Kellogg, who was beside Dolan, had also risen. "Hey Pitan," Dake greeted. The little fatty Pitan waved his hand at Doran, and quickly walked to Dake's side. He laughed softly. Haha, Dake, I won't be as easy to deal with as Röntgen. Dake asked curiously. A secret weapon? Pitan patted his belly and smiled mysteriously. Just you wait and see. After the two of them entered the contestant passage, they waited for a while before arriving at the duel arena under the guidance of the staff. After they shook hands in the middle, they walked back to back toward the contestant stands on both sides. Dake was still on the red side, while Pitan was on the blue side. After getting on the contestant platform, Dake inserted the card deck into the card slot and activated the card table. Then he heard cheers coming from outside. He turned his head slightly and saw Dolan waving two flags with the names Dake Dimming and Pitan Kellogg on them. He couldn't help but laugh. No wonder he's young. He's full of energy. He shook his head and turned to the front. Suddenly he looked up and said, Pitan, let me see your secret weapon. Pitan also activated the card table and said, Don't be too surprised in a moment. After he finished speaking, he glanced at the audience outside the arena. His heart skipped a beat. He had always heard that those in the spinach industry would bet on the number of rounds of a duel, if there was no suspense in the outcome. For example, in Dake's duel with Röntgen, there must have been a lot of people who had done their research and bet on 1 or 3 rounds. Then they got a lot of money. In this duel he guessed that he would receive the same treatment as Röntgen. But today he, Pitan, was going to let those spinach people know what it meant to pay back. Beep! With the referee's whistle, the duel finally entered the preparation stage. Then, behind the preparation stage, a 30s countdown appeared. The players on both sides looked serious and immediately focused their attention on the duel. When all 5 cards were in their hands, they quickly thought of a strategy. Dake looked at his cards. Fruit-eating bug, meow meow. Greed 3, bliss 3-month, sickle cut dagger, 2 magic elf cards, 2 great sin cards and 1 equipment card. There's no problem with a combination. Since the opponent is Pitan, there's not much difference between summoning the fruit-eating bug or summoning meow meow. Thinking about how Trash Slime was the starter in the last duel, it was not good to favor one and discriminate against the other. After the 30-second countdown ended, Dake immediately started summoning. In the name of Dake Dimming, it's decided that it's you, fruit-eating bug. 3 seconds later, a bright red apple fell from the sky and landed on top of the red magic ball. Dake's summoning of a 1-star magic elf in the last duel was already shocking enough. The audience did not expect him to do so in this duel. Moreover, they had never seen a fruit-eating bug before and had no understanding of this 1-star magic elf. Hence, their minds were full of question marks. But on the blue team platform, Piston did not relax in the slightest. He knew very well that Dark was not the kind of person who would shoot without thinking. Even if the magic elf he summoned was a harmless baby, it could turn into a terrifying evil dragon in the next moment. Hence he gave it his all. When Dake's normal summoning had just finished its cooldown, Pitan finally completed his summoning. In the name of Pitan Kellogg, I summon Spiral Steel Snake. Hiss! A dazzling silver light shot out from the magic elf card. A large snake with a layer of silver carapace on its back appeared in the light of the summoning. Pitan's magic elf was quite rare, but as a popular magic elf among the 3-star magic elves, it was easily recognizable. The Spiral Steel Snake's silver carapace could be hard or soft. When it was hard, it was incomparably hard. When it was soft, it was like a normal snake's skin that could be rolled around at will. This was also the reason for its name. Card name, Spiral Steel Snake. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, Reptile. Attribute, Steel. Magic power, 1400. Attack, 500. Defense, 1600. Ultimate skill, Spiral Steel. Spiral Steel was the most basic ultimate skill of the Spiral Steel Snake. After Pitan successfully summoned it, he immediately shouted, Spiral Steel Snake, roll up. The large snake with the silver carapace only paused for a moment, then immediately followed his command and coiled around the blue magic elf ball behind it. In the blink of an eye, it coiled around the blue magic elf ball into a huge ball. The silver carapace faced outwards, and at that moment, it lit up with a bright silver light. The steel elemental energy surged wildly, turning the soft carapace into hard steel, and its defense skyrocketed. However, when the ultimate skill of the spiral steel snake was completed, Dake had also completed his second summoning. The light of greed 3 shone once again. The fruit-gnawing worm, which was curled up in the apple shell, faced the blue-purple light and began to evolve. This was the first time it stepped onto the stage of a duel, and its heart was filled with the desire to perform and win. That desire turned into greed, causing it to lean towards the offensive, apple-wrapped dragon, between the two forms of evolution. Figure card name, apple-wrapped dragon type, elf card. Level, *****. Race, dragon attribute. Grass/dragon magic power, 1600 attack, 2000, defense, 1000. Ultimate skill, vitality gravitation dragon's dive substitute. The apple-wrapped dragon spread its wings and flew into the sky. Although it was still only the size of an apple, the aura it emitted was completely different. Dake looked up at the spiral steel snake in the blue summoning area and asked in surprise, "Is this your strategy?" Pitan glanced at the magic elf in the red summoning area that he had never seen before and braced himself to say, "This is just the beginning." Roar. Suddenly, a sharp dragon's roar sounded from below. The apple-wrapped dragon's body lit up with a purple light that symbolized greed. Dake tapped on the magic card and immediately noticed that the apple-wrapped dragon was in the vitality state. The magic elf that had the ultimate skill, vitality, would have its attack power increase by 1.5 times when it was excited, but too much excitement would cause it to miss. As if sensing the apple-wrapped dragon's excitement, Dake's mood also rose slightly. In that case, apple-wrapped dragon, begin your performance. Dragon's dive. The petite grass dragon soared into the sky amidst the dragon's roar, and then swooped down from the sky at lightning speed like a goshawk hunting a rabbit. In that instant, its body emitted a terrifying murderous aura. The spiral steel snake, that had curled up into a steel ball, trembled under the stimulation of the murderous aura. On the blue platform, Pitan's scalp was also numb. He gripped the second magic card tightly, and immediately began to chant. In the spiral steel snake's spiral steel state, its defense increased by 0.5 times, reaching 2,400 points. But when apple-wrapped dragon swooped down, its momentum that seemed to be able to tear through everything made him panic. He had already bragged. If he were to be killed in a single round like Rentgen, wouldn't he lose all face? Pitan broke through his limits in the midst of his high tension, further reducing the duration of his normal summoning spell. But before that, the apple-wrapped dragon had already pierced through the spiral steel snake's steel shell. Boom! The spiral steel snake's steel shell cracked open layer by layer, revealing the bright red flesh within. The spiral steel snake let out a shrill cry of fear, struggling at death's door with its last bit of magic power left. But when the apple-wrapped dragon wanted to continue after that attack, a beam of white light suddenly fell from above its head. When the white light disappeared, the spiral steel snake's body had an additional layer of hard, but also extremely heavy steel shell. Its already exaggerated defensive power instantly increased by another step. Just in time, Pitan, who was on the blue team's platform, took a deep breath. What was equipped on the spiral steel snake was not an equipment or item, but a magic elf called Steel Shell Beast. Card name, Steel Shell Beast. Type, elf card. Level, race, elemental. Attribute, steel. Magic power, 800. Attack, 0. Defense, 1000. Ultimate skill, Steel Shell Parasite. He had placed a large number of defensive magic cards in the 20-card deck, and this Steel Shell Beast was one of them. Steel Shell Beast could only parasitize magic elves with steel attributes and a shell. Although it would cause the host's movement speed to plummet, it could increase its defense by 500 points. Moreover, the Steel Shell Beast's remaining magic power after casting Steel Shell Parasite would also stack together with the fusion of the two magic elves. The spiral steel snake could be said to be ruthless. After parasitizing the Steel Shell Beast, the spiral steel snake's defense should be able to reach 2,900 points. Even a second-tier magic elf would find it difficult to break through its defense. If it can hold on, I still have a defense spell, in my hand that can continue to stack its defense. If it can hold on until the next round, I'll draw. Just as Pitan was counting down the cooldown of his summoning, the apple-wrapped dragon flapped its wings fiercely after casting Dragon's Dive and continued to slash. The layer of thick steel shell that had been stirred up was viciously torn apart. Piston was dumbfounded. Even the steel shell could not defend against it. This meant that the apple-wrapped dragon's normal attack had exceeded 2,900 points. This ordinary-looking little dragon was actually so terrifying. Pitan quickly looked at the spiral steel snake's magic card and found that its magic power had only decreased by less than 100 points after this normal attack. He quickly focused on continuing his summoning. However, after the apple-wrapped dragon realized that its attack was not effective, it suddenly let out a long cry and summoned a bright red apple out of thin air. The apple appeared high up in the sky and fell rapidly, heavily smashing into the spiral steel snake's head. The steel shell beast's high defense that it had painstakingly accumulated was reduced by half under the universal gravity's sure kill skill. At this moment, the apple-wrapped dragon once again revealed its claws and fangs. It tore through the spiral steel snake's defense like a piece of paper. The spiral steel snake that had parasitized the steel shell beast, together with the steel shell beast, turned into magic light spots on the spot and dissipated outwards. Pitan's chanting came to an abrupt end. The apple-wrapped dragon's dragon horn had already hit the blue cube magic ball. The life barrier with only 4,000 points of magic power could not withstand the apple-wrapped dragon's two normal attacks. Pitan hurriedly stopped chanting and released his magic power, pulling the blue cube magic ball up into the sky. However, after the apple-wrapped dragon let out an excited cry, it flapped its wings fiercely and chased after it. Meanwhile, in the red square summoning area, Dake Dimung, who used all his strength even when a lion was hunting a rabbit, had already summoned Meow Meow. The gray cat hugged its chest and guarded in front of the magic ball, squinting at the apple-wrapped dragon that was full of vitality. It suddenly had the artistic urge to use an apple to carve the apple-wrapped dragon. Dake had already extended his finger and shot out magic power lines, interfering with the blue cube magic ball's manipulation. Under the interference, the apple-wrapped dragon quickly caught up with the blue cube magic ball. 40000. Damn it. In the end, Pitan, who could not withstand the first round, was so angry that he slammed the table. In the end, he did not make the spinach gang pay back. However, this was definitely not his fault. It was just that the apple-sized dragon was too much. Hey Pitan, where's your secret weapon? The voice from the other side calmed Pitan down. He said stubbornly, bad luck next time. Dake smiled and said, you can't draw all the magic cards you want in the preparation stage, right? I'm looking forward to seeing your secret weapon next time. Okay, definitely. Pitan could not help but laugh dryly. You smiled and so did I. The duel brought smiles to all of us. The battle is over. Winner, Dake Dimung. With the referee's announcement, the duel was finally over. After Dake put the apple-wrapped dragon back into the magic card, he stepped down from the stage and returned to Deanna and Luoxi's side. However, he did not stay in the ring for too long. He grabbed his backpack and headed to the library. He already had a clue on how to make the clown mask. As long as he looked for some books, he could start researching the formula of this softening agent and write the magic language to refine the clown mask. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Dake arrived at the open-air dueling arena early in the morning. Today's duels were scheduled for the morning and afternoon. Both of his opponents were students from the School of Magic. Among the 4 schools in the second grade, the students from the School of Magic had a higher ability to learn independently. Although some of them kept a low profile, they were still able to make magic cards that could not be underestimated. Dake's opponent in the morning's duel was the second-year head of the School of Magic, Heidi Euphemia. Heidi was Saraswati's little follower, so Dake was no stranger to her. However, Dake had never fought her before. This duel for the Silver Cup could be considered the first time for both of them. Heidi's expression was very serious. She untied the 2 thick braids that always hung in front of her chest and combed them into a standard matronly hairstyle. Her entire temperament had changed considerably. At least it seemed that she had the aura of a head of a school. Saraswati, who was watching from the ring, nodded with satisfaction. She was quite confident in her own skills. On the other hand, Doran, who was sitting on the other side, was a little stunned. Pitam forcefully poked his waist. Ouch! As he cried out in pain. Both contestants had already placed their cards into the slots. The projection of the preparation stage appeared in the air. Dake only greeted Heidi briefly before he focused his attention on the duel. In order to deal with Heidi, he rearranged the deck last night and reduced the number of cards in the deck again. In the past, Heidi's performance was almost the epitome of Sarah's. If he didn't stay on guard, even he would have the possibility of being defeated. Beep. Preparation stage. 30s. Both contestants took out 5 magic cards from the top of the deck at the same time. 23/127. Good morning. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket and a guaranteed blade. Card name, White Blade Spider. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, Insect. Attribute, Bug Magic Power, 1000 Attack, 1400 Defense, 500 Ultimate Skills. Steel Blade Spider Web, Sticky Silk Spit. Strictly speaking, spiders were not insects, but in this world, they were classified as insect species. As a bug-type magic guide fairy, White Blade Spider gave a rather beautiful visual impression. White Blade Spider spread the web. After it was summoned, it immediately obeyed Heidi's order, lifting its 2 front legs and hitting the ground hard. At that moment, white spider silk rapidly spread from its body to the front, and in the blink of an eye, it laid out a huge spider web that covered half of the blue team's summoning area. The spider silk of the spider web was as sharp as a steel blade, and some of the spider silk even had extremely thin saw teeth. If someone stepped on it, they would definitely be injured. However, White Blade Spider could glide on the spider web at an extremely fast speed. Therefore, although White Blade Spider's 3 measurements were not high, it was still useful as a part of a positional battle. Heidi closely watched Dake's movements, and after confirming that Dake did not choose to attack, she was slightly relieved. This was actually not a common occurrence in Dake's duels. If Dake chose to attack, she could only order White Blade Spider to use another surekill skill, Sticky Silk Spit, to restrict Dake's magic guide fairy. Maybe he didn't get a strong attack-type magic guide fairy. Heidi thought for a moment, and saw Dake summon a second magic guide fairy. It was the more familiar, fantasy beast, Multiform. Most of Dake Diming's magic guide fairies were extremely unique, and it was very difficult to forget after seeing them. Heidi had done in-depth research on him, and was very familiar with his magic guide fairies. This fantasy beast, Multiform, could transform into other magic guide fairies, and was very troublesome. However, its weakness was also very obvious. Its magic value was not high. This meant that in a head-on battle, the side that was cloned would have the advantage. Therefore, there was no need to be too nervous. She took out a second magic guide card and quickly summoned. In the blue team's summoning area, a gigantic bee appeared. Card name, Toxic Queen Bee. Type, Fairy card. Level, *****. Race, Insect. Attribute, Bug. Magic, 1500. Attack, 1300. Defense, 1300. Surekill skills, Poison Needle. Egg laying. This toxic queen bee, that was almost a meter tall, had a huge abdomen, and the tips of its 2 front legs were thin and long, like 2 poison needles. It was also an insect-type magic guide fairy, but it was completely different from the beautiful appearance of the White Blade Spider. It was an enlarged version of a real bee, and its thin and long hair could be seen clearly, making one's scalp tingle. After it was summoned, it immediately used one of its surekill skills, egg laying. 3 insect eggs shot out from its abdomen and landed on the blue magic ball. After 15 seconds of incubation, these 3 insect eggs would hatch into 3 1-star, toxic bees. With these 3 hypertoxic bees, all the offerings needed for the sacrificial summoning had been gathered. Heidi still did not command the toxic queen bee to attack. She held one of the magic guide cards tightly, as if waiting for an opportunity. After Dake summoned the fantasy beast, ever-changing monster, he did not act rashly either. The first round of the battle round ended unexpectedly in a stalemate. Battle round 2. 30s. Asterisk tick. Asterisk both players drew their cards at the same time. With 2 new magic guide cards in hand, Dake's heart moved, and he directly picked up one of the magic guide cards and summoned it on the spot. Greed 3. Eagle Wrestling. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Greed 3. It was indeed a very lucky thing to be able to draw Greed 3 in the second round. Dake looked at the sharp spiderweb that covered the blue half of the field, and he couldn't help but smirk. He controlled the light of Greed 3 and shone it on Little Snorlax. Little Snorlax sat on the ground, and its body grew rapidly under the light of evolution. In the blink of an eye, its weight increased by 4 times. Little Snorlax had evolved from a baby to an adult Snorlax. Snorlax was more than 2 meters tall. It had a huge body and an honest face, and its eyes were always squinting into a line. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Zizi, if it wasn't for Dake's order, it would have fallen asleep on the spot. Snorlax, break the spiderweb. After Snorlax completed its evolution, Dake immediately gave out the order. Crack! Snorlax lazily crawled up from the ground. Then it walked toward the blue team's half with swaying steps. Snorlax wasn't interested in the battle at all. Although it was also the incarnation of greed, it didn't have a strong desire to show off like the fruit-eating bug. In fact, it just wanted to end the battle as soon as possible so that it could go back to the magic guide card and sleep. Although it looked like it was walking slowly, it was actually not slow at all. Soon, it arrived at the center of the field. Snorlax just glanced at the white blade spider on the opposite side and slowly lifted its foot. Heidi, who had just completed a new round of summoning, suddenly changed her expression and shouted, "Toxic Queen Bee! Poison Needle!" After a moment, the toxic queen bee that was flying in the air aimed at Snorlax and suddenly shot out thin and long poison needles. Each of the poison needles was as long as a chopstick, and the tip of the needles was dark as if it was soaked in poison. Then puff, puff, puff. The 10 poison needles all hit Snorlax's body. However, Snorlax didn't retreat at all. It allowed the poison needles to be bounced off by its fat, and finally, it stomped its foot. Ultimate skill. Heavy stomp. Bang! It sounded like a thunderclap. Snorlax's stomp made the ground tremble. The white light became bigger and bigger, and suddenly, a horrifying circular shockwave burst out. The steel blade spider that the white blade spider had painstakingly arranged was smashed into pieces by the circular shockwave of heavy stomp. The circular shockwave had a wide range, and even the white blade spider that was lying on the ground was affected. The white blade spider was an extremely fragile magic elf. After being hit by the shockwave, it melted instantly, leaving not even a shadow behind. Buzz buzz buzz. The 3 hatched 1-star, toxic bees, flew into the air in a panic. The blue magic ball was pulled up by Heidi in an emergency, and successfully avoided the shockwave. She was still frightened and instantly held the magic card in her hand tightly. Then, she gritted her teeth and began the sacrificial summoning. Although the first round passed safely, Heidi didn't think that she was lucky. When facing Dake that even Sarah was no match for, she was actually a little scared. But she chose to face the difficulties in the end. In the second round, she secretly arranged a secret instrument card, and then began the sacrificial summoning. At the same time, the toxic queen bee that was flying in the air also met the wrestling eagle man. The 2 magic elves began to fight fiercely, and Heidi's sense of urgency was even stronger. Her sacrificial summoning wasn't fast. Once the toxic queen bee's magical power dropped below half, the success rate of the sacrificial summoning would be greatly reduced. Therefore, she had to complete the summoning before then. On the red team's platform, Dake observed the whole situation and then lit up Bliss 3. The magical beast, variety monster, that was guarding in front of the red magic ball expanded slightly in the light of Bliss, and became a 4-star magic elf. Hurry, hurry! Its eyes became sharp, but it didn't find the target of transformation. Only Snorlax was a second-tier magic elf, but Snorlax had no way to deal with aerial units. It narrowed its eyes and aimed at the magic elf that Heidi was about to sacrifice to summon in advance. Heidi's sacrificial summoning was indeed a little slow. When she finally completed it, the 30-second countdown of the second round was almost over. The toxic queen bee relied on the poison of the two needles to barely hold on until now. Sacrifice the toxic queen bee and a toxic bee as sacrifices to the sacrificial summoning. Cyan feathered flying snake. In Heidi's magic elf cards, except for the white blade spider, most of them were magic elves that could fly. That was to prevent her own magic elf from being restricted by the steel blade spider web. Clear feather flying snake also flew in the air and could effectively avoid heavy stomp and earthquake. Snorlax finally entered the battlefield, but it could only sit with its head raised. The flying snake with green feathers appeared in the light of the sacrificial summoning array, and the secret instrument card that Heidi had set up in advance was successfully triggered. In the blue team's summoning area, a transparent vortex suddenly appeared. Then a transparent clear feather flying snake suddenly drilled out and let out a shrill cry. Card name, Cyan feathered flying snake. Type, elf card. Level, race, bird beast. Attribute, normal. Magical power, 2100, attack, 2200, defense, 1400, ultimate skill, feather arrow multiple feather arrow, cyan feathered flying snake. As 3 attributes were not ranked among the 5-star magic elves at all, but for a student who had just entered the second year, it was already extremely difficult to create such an invisible magic elf card. Not to mention that there were 2 cyan feathered flying snakes in Heidi's field. Although the cyan feathered flying snake that was cloned by the secret instrument card did not last long and its 3 attributes were reduced, it was still fierce. Heidi's aura rose. Cyan feathered flying snake, shoot feather arrow. The 2 clear feather flying snakes immediately rushed out. The 2 feather arrows were shot in succession. One was shot at the wrestling Hawkman in the air, and the other was shot at the Snorlax on the ground. But the wrestling Hawkman dodged the feather arrow at an extremely fast speed. The Snorlax let the feather arrow hit it, and it still did not hurt or itch. Multiple feather arrow. Heidi suddenly shouted loudly. The tick sound of the turn change was covered by the shouts. Heidi was obviously anxious. The multiple feather arrows, shot by the 2 cyan feathered flying snakes, at the same time covered the sky and the sun. The wrestling Hawkman could not dodge and disappeared after being hit by several feather arrows in succession. The Snorlax was still unmoved, and in the red team's summoning area, the 3rd cyan feathered flying snake flew up. Good morning. Chapter 623. Battle Stage 3. 30s. Dake calmly drew his cards. The situation on the field was actually very clear. Heidi's deck was slightly different from what he expected. Although it was above average, the gap between her and Sarah was still quite big. The 2 cyan feather flying snakes seemed to be her limit. He ordered the multiform monster to transform into a cyan feather flying snake, which was enough to protect his magic conducting ball. Then in the 3rd round of card drawing, the winner would be decided. Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast, Warhorn memorize in 1 second. Vipkanshu. 6 as expected. While Heidi was still focused on the command of the 2 cyan feather flying snakes, Dake had already summoned Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast. Then, without waiting for anything else, he directly summoned Pride 3. The long-awaited demon beast opened its pitch-black demon wings in the middle of the dark golden light pillar. A ferocious roar resounded through the field, and a thick dark aura spread out. He, the devil beast, let out a cold laugh, and its tall body completely disappeared when it turned around. When it appeared again, it had already instantly teleported to the top of the transparent, cyan feather flying snake. Then a huge sharp death claw burst out. Ultimate skill. Death Claw. The transparent cyan feather flying snake's body was instantly penetrated by the death claw. Its body struggled slightly, and actually collapsed on the spot. Cyan feather flying snake. Heidi instantly clenched her teeth. The real cyan feather flying snake suddenly turned around and opened its mouth to bite the devil beast. However, the devil beast did not dodge. It only raised its left arm to block the cyan feather flying snake's bite. Then it raised its right arm high and suddenly blasted out. With this attack, a large number of death claws appeared in front of the devil beast, and each claw tore off a piece of the cyan feather flying snake's body. The cyan feather flying snake howled and turned into light. Everything developed so quickly that it was shocking. A mere 4-star, evil devil beast had actually killed 2 5-star green feather flying snakes in an extremely short amount of time. At this moment, the green feather flying snake that the ever-changing monster transformed into had just raised its feathers and was about to release multiple feather arrows. However, in the face of the life barrier of the blue cube magic ball, the multiple feather arrows still had some effect. On the blue team's platform, Heidi loosened her clenched teeth after both cyan feather flying snakes were described. People were like that. They would only do their best when they saw hope. Hard work without a goal in sight would only wear down a person's willpower. After Heidi confirmed that she could no longer perform, she chose to give up. This duel, which had lasted for a long time, finally ended when the blue cube magic ball was destroyed by the multi-feather arrow of the monster of change. 40000. Beep. The referee blew his whistle and announced the winner. The applause was still thunderous, and the atmosphere on the stage remained unchanged. Dake didn't say anything to Heidi after recalling all of his magic guide fairies. They weren't familiar with each other. As the winner, no matter what he said, it was easy to be mistaken as arrogant words. Considering that there might be more opportunities for them to interact in the future, Dake chose not to say a word. After Dake walked down the platform, Heidi slowly recovered and turned to walk down the platform. The two sides passed through the contestant tunnel one after the other and entered the circular belt. Then they separated into 2 paths and sat down in different audience seats. Dake felt a little bored, but this was how a magic guide duel was. Once the difference in skill level was too great, the random factors in the rules couldn't change the final result at all. And a duel that was destined to be won would naturally make people lose their excitement, even if some of the duelists would be immersed in the feeling of being crushed. But Dake was clearly not one of them. When he was in his first year, he had already passed the stage of seeking victory. He had already entered the stage of seeking defeat. What he needed was the excitement after doing all he could, not the merciless crushing of noobs. 2 more rounds. It'll be over after 2 rounds. Dake patted his cheeks and tried to maintain his state. Come on, have some candy. Deanna came over and stuffed a milk candy into his mouth without warning. Dake chewed twice, and the milk sweetness reached his heart. Under the blue sky, the young men and women on the duel stage were sweating to their heart's content. Time flowed by them like water. When people came back to their senses, it was already 2 in the afternoon. Dark stepped onto the contestant platform once again. In the 9th round of the Silver Cup competition, his opponent was Ignatz Malcolm, who was also a second-year student of the Magic Academy like Heidi Euphemia. The Magic Guide had always been full of talented people. Although Dake didn't pay much attention to Stephen Combe, he seemed to be a top student in the Magic Guide, second only to Sarah Swati. If Sarah was the top student in the Magic Guide, then Stephen Combe was the top student in the Magic Guide. It was just that Stephen's personality didn't seem to be very sociable, so he didn't build his own fans like Sarah Swati. He didn't become the leader of the second year in the Magic Guide, mostly because of his personality. Dake raised his head and observed for a while. Stephen had neatly combed short brown hair, thin eyebrows, a high nose, thin lips, and a square face. He didn't look very friendly. But the gold-rimmed glasses on his nose added a bit of a student's aura. Dake thought for a while and confirmed that he hadn't talked to Stephen much, so he prepared to put the deck into the card slot and wait for the duel to start. But Stephen Combe, who was supposed to be a man of few words, opened his mouth. Dake Dimming, you're very strong. Dake couldn't help but frown and look at him again. Stephen Combe adjusted his glasses and said seriously, but you should know that if a person is too dazzling, they will expose themselves to too many people. As far as I know, there are already a lot of 3rd and 4th year seniors studying you. Of course, I've also studied you for a long time. Dake smiled and raised his hand. I'm not honored. Stephen calm continued. I spoke to you before the duel began because I wanted to give you a warning. If you underestimate me, you'll be in trouble. Dake was slightly startled and asked curiously, why do you think you'll be underestimated? Stephen calm was speechless. Beep. The whistle sounded at the right time. The words preparation stage appeared on the card table. Both players immediately put the deck into the card slot and activated the automatic shuffle of the card table. Dake didn't ignore Stephen Calm's words, but what Stephen Calm said was within his expectations. In a Magic Guide duel, who didn't study their opponent? But being studied wasn't scary. What was scary was being stagnant. In other words, as long as there was new progress every moment, there was no need to be afraid of being studied. Preparation stage, 30s. They abandoned all distracting thoughts and focused on the duel. Both players drew their cards almost at the same time, then looked at their hands and thought of countermeasures. Dake opened his hand. Fusion, Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast, Bliss 3-month, Diru Beast, Trash Slime. Starting with Fusion. Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast and Diru Beast were both in his hands. Other than not meeting the conditions to sacrifice and summon Diru Beast, the prerequisites for Fusion and Summon were all there. However, these 5 starting points were not ideal. Speaking of which, it's been a long time since I fused and summoned Basti Beast. Thinking of the feeling of fusing the Little Devil Beast and the Diru Beast into one entity, Dake couldn't help but smile. However, Basti Beast was no longer the strongest trump card in his hands. Using too many Magic Guide cards to summon it was actually a loss. Moreover, he hadn't gathered all the elements this time. Moreover, the 5 Magic Guide cards in his hands didn't have many strategies to think about. He only thought for a moment and picked out Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast. In the first round, if he wanted to ensure the strength of the Magic Guide Fairy on the field, the only way was to evolve Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast into Curse Cage, Black Diru Beast. He didn't hesitate. The moment the preparation stage switched to the battle stage, he chanted, in the name of Dake Dimming, Magic Guide summon Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast. The little devil with bat wings once again appeared in the audience's field of vision. The Little Devil Beast evolved into the form of Devil Beast in the morning's duel. It must still be imprinted in the audience's minds. But the direction of its evolution this time wasn't Devil Beast. Only 2 seconds after Dake completed his summoning, Stephen Calm also completed his summoning. He looked at the Little Devil Beast on the red side's summoning area and couldn't help but smile. Good. Thunderblast Beast. On the blue side's summoning area, Stephen Malcolm's magic elf, the Thunderblast Beast, immediately raised its head. The Thunderblast Beast looked like an upright lizard with an umbrella on its head. However, the tip of the umbrella-shaped object on its head was a long horn that looked like a lightning rod. Card name, Thunderblast Beast. Type, Sprite card. Level, *****. Race, reptile. Attribute, electric. Magic power, 1500. Attack, 1200. Defense, 1000. Killing skills, electronic interference. Lightning summon, Thunderblast Beast. Electronic interference. Stephen Calm held the Thunderblast Beast's magic card and suddenly shouted. The Thunderblast Beast immediately closed its eyes and gathered its magic power. The needle-shaped long horn on its head instantly twined with crackling electric currents. With Stephen Calm's command, the electric currents instantly exploded, forming a huge electric barrier that could cover the entire venue. Dake was about to start a new round of summoning when he suddenly felt something strange. He couldn't help but frown. Magic power interference barrier? The electronic interference released by the Thunderblast Beast was obviously not only aimed at electronic products, but also at magic power or some other things. I see. Almost immediately, Dark figured out the crux of the matter. He realized that the results of the research that Stephen Malcolm had mentioned were here. Dake's fighting style was extremely special. In most people's eyes, he was used to using a special strengthening type of magic card to strengthen the magic sprite card and raise its star level. From there, he could special summon a high-star magic sprite to gain an advantage. In that case, what about disrupting and blocking his fighting style from the root? Stephen Combe was probably using this line of thought. The number of magic cards in his hands that could block energy was certainly not a small number. This Thunderblast beast should be just one of them. However, even though he had figured out the trick, Dake did not stop summoning. He still summoned and activated Bliss 3 Moon as fast as he could after the 3-second cooldown. Stephen Combe's tactics had indeed alerted him, but the brilliance of Great Sin was not so easy to block. The electronic interference barrier released by the Thunderblast beast was penetrated by the brilliance of Bliss in the blink of an eye. It was as if there was no barrier at all. The little devil beast on the red team's summoning area became a luminous object in the golden-pink brilliance. Stephen Combe, who was on the blue team's platform, was shocked for a moment. So much so that the summoning of the second magic card in his hand was a beat slower. The little devil beast had successfully evolved into a Heidi Road beast. Although the Heidi Road beast was not considered the top among the 4-star magic sprites, it was not too weak with 2 sure kill skills. Due to the limited cards in his hand, Dake did not advance rashly. Instead, he ordered the Heidi Road beast to take a defensive measure for the time being. At this time, Stephen Combe finally forced himself to calm down and began to summon the second magic card. However, the application of electronic interference made him have no choice but to change the interference spell that he had originally planned to summon to a magic sprite card that could enhance combat power. Then the Thunderblast beast that he had summoned at the start launched a second wave of attacks during this period. Boom! Dake only felt a thunder sound out of nowhere, and a bolt of lightning really appeared in his field of vision. That bolt of lightning crossed the distance between the arenas and directly shot from below the electronic interference barrier to the Heidi Road beast that had just completed its evolution. This speed even made Dake wonder why it had not used the sure kill skill at the first moment. If it had not used electronic interference at the first moment, but had directly used lightning summon, the little devil beast might have been lying on the ground as a corpse. Dake looked at the Heidi Road beast that had been blasted by this bolt of lightning and became alert again. Although electronic interference did not produce the expected effect, it was indeed a way to obstruct Dake's plan. And a sure kill skill like lightning summon, which was a long-range, high-speed attack, was the nemesis of low-star magic sprites like the little devil beast, Ivan, and other low-star magic sprites. Good morning. Big shots, please cast your minimum monthly votes and minimum blades. Salty reason. I don't have much free time these few days. I'll start desperately paying back in 2 days. Chapter 624. Stephen Combe's words before the match were not false. He had indeed done a very detailed study of Dake's tactical system. However, if he wanted to use the results of his research in practice, he would need the corresponding strength. Stephen Combe had noticed the loopholes in Dake's tactical system and formulated a corresponding strategy. However, not to mention the late lightning, the Thunderblast beast's electronic interference could not stop the Great Sin card from working. Since electronic interference was useless, then the other magic cards that he had prepared for this, of course, they wouldn't work either. The moment Stephen Combe's electronic interference failed, he had already noticed this. The anxiety in his heart almost burst out. However, this was a duel on the stage with thousands of spectators watching. He could not leave on the spot, so he could only bite the bullet and continue. The good news was, lightning summon had indeed caused damage to the second-tier magic elf, the Hedala beast. This meant that this magic elf, which hadn't appeared many times, wasn't as strong as another white cat of the same appearance. Diru beast. Dark Diamond's hand doesn't seem to be ideal. It's not like he doesn't have a chance. After analyzing this point, Stephen Combe focused more on the summoning of the second magic elf card. Then, without Dake making a move, he successfully summoned the second magic elf. On the left side of the Thunderblast beast, a mud-like magic elf slowly stood up. Card name Mud Monster. Type Elf card. Level ****. Race Elemental. Attribute Ground. Magic power 1200. Attack 1200. Defense 400. Ultimate skills Disintegrate. Mud Summon Ground Elemental. Purple card. The Mud Monster, which was similar to the Stinky Mud, had a certain degree of physical immunity. Like some elemental species, it could split into several smaller elemental species. As for the second Surekill skill, it was a field skill. It turned part of the field into a muddy swamp, so that the opposing magic elf could not approach from the ground. In the situation where the opponent did not have long-range attacks or flying magic elves, it could ensure the safety of the magic ball. This type of field skill was considered common in magic duels. Some spells were even enough to produce a similar effect. Stephen Combe glanced at Dake and said in a deep voice, "Mud monster, summon mud." The mud monster suddenly spat out a large amount of mud from under its body. The mud on the ground gradually turned into a muddy swamp. Then, he breathed a sigh of relief and waited nervously for Dake's move. However, Dake still did not move. As expected, after that bolt of lightning, the Thunderblast beast no longer has any long-range killing skills. Dark held the Diru Beast magic card in his right hand. He was originally considering whether to offer the spell Cage, Black Diru Beast, as a sacrifice to summon the Diru Beast on the spot. However, he did not do so after observing the situation. The result proved that his judgment was correct. Even if he summoned the beast, it would be difficult to break through the muddy swamp and approach the opponent's magic ball. Of course, he did not want to dirty the beast. Since Stephen chose to drag it out, I'll go with his wishes, Dake thought. However, the first round did not end there. After Stephen Combe realized that Dake had no intention of attacking, he still unwillingly released the interference curse. Who cares if it's useful or not, I'll stack it first. Moreover, the interference curse could also interfere with the flow of magic. When it was placed on the electrical interference barrier, it could interfere with the ultimate skills of the aerial units and affect the long-range magic control of the magisters. This was relatively advantageous for him, who had a layer of mud on the ground. Battle Stage 2, 30s. Then it was the second round. Although both players had different expressions, they immediately took 2 magic cards from the top of the deck. Dake looked down and his heart skipped a beat. He raised his head slightly. Greed 3, Dream Demon, Greed 3? In this way, we even have the sacrifice to summon the Diru Beast? There were many tactics that could be implemented. However, Dake did not hesitate the moment he saw Greed 3. In the first 2 rounds, he was able to meet the conditions to summon the Basti Beast. This seemingly fateful hand made him feel as if he had heard the call of the Basti Beast. In that case, it's decided to be you. Trash Slime. After 3 seconds, Dake successfully cast the normal summoning spell and summoned the Trash Slime. He specifically summoned it above the red magic ball's life barrier and signaled for the Black Diru Beast to protect it. While waiting for the cooldown of the normal summoning spell to end, he continued to observe the opponent. He found that Stephen Combe's originally dispirited expression had returned to normal. At the beginning of the second round, he ordered the Mud Monster in the blue summoning area to cast Disintegrate. Then the Mud Monster split into 3 parts. Each of them swelled up into a small mud monster and slid into the swamp, disappearing without a trace. As for Stephen Combe, he was casting the Sacrificial Summoning at an extremely fast speed. The second year had an assessment requirement for the use of the Sacrificial Summoning, but there were not many people who had already started practicing it. Stephen Combe was obviously one of them. At a glance, it was obvious that he was the type who was very serious in his studies and research. He was also very clear about the goal he wanted to achieve, and would keep moving forward to achieve it. In the future, he might grow into a strong opponent. With a thought, Dake immediately began a new summoning. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon Greed 3. Even if electronic interference was stacked with interference curse, it could not affect Greed 3's radiance at all. Stephen Combe's eyebrows twitched slightly. On the other hand, Dark retracted his radiance and shone on the Trash Slime. Trash Slime evolved into Greed Slime 2 for the second time on this duel stage. When this jelly-like slime, which was more than 1.5 meters tall, appeared from the edge of light, the Heidi Road Beast immediately retreated behind it. As a 4-star magic elf, Greed Slime 2 had 2,000 points of defense and 3,000 points of magic power. In terms of the 3 attributes, It was a completely exceptional existence. Its killing skill, photosynthesis, also increased its defense by 1,500 points. This made it very reliable. Greed Slime, use Divide and Succeed. 4. Dake gave the order, and a huge sacrificial summoning array finally lit up in the blue summoning area. When the light came on, Stephen Combs' face lit up with joy. Since interference tactic was useless and quick attack tactic was meaningless, then he could only rely on his strength to win. Whether it was luck or not, in short, he was sure that this time he summoned a magic elf that could determine the outcome of the duel before Dake dimming. There is 1 3-star Thunderstorm Beast and 2 1-star Slime Monsters. Sacrifice them to summon Fusion Beast. Card name: Fusion Beast. Type: Elf. Card level: Race: Undying. Species: Attribute: Ground Evil. Magic power: 2,500. Attack: 2,400. Defense: 1,800. Killing skill: None. 5-star Magic Elf. Fusion Beast. The Fusion Beast that appeared from the sacrificial summoning array had a huge body that was nearly 3 meters tall. Its main body was a huge octopus with 8 tentacles. At the mouth part, there was a sawtooth beak that looked like scissors. On both sides of its body, there was a thick ape arm and a slender praying mantis arm. Starting from the top of its head, along the spine all the way down to one of its tentacles, there were eyeballs of various creatures densely distributed. On both sides of the eyeballs, there were broken demon wings. This fusion beast was like a failed product that walked out of a laboratory. However, while it was a combination of ground and dark elements, it was also an undying species. Its magic power had reached the full 5-star level. Although its attack was not full, it was not weak either. Even its defense was 1,800 points, which could not be considered a shortcoming at all. Its special body structure also allowed it to move quickly in the muddy swamp. In summary, other than being a white card without a killing skill, this fusion beast did not have any obvious shortcomings. If Dake did not respond in time, the fusion beast would indeed give him hope. Next, it's time to blow the horn to attack. Stephen Combs raised his head and anxiously shouted, "Fusion beast, charge across the field and attack the magic guide ball." It would take a lot of time to deal with the other magic guide spirits. Stephen Combs knew that he could not afford to wait. He could only fight to end the battle in the second round to have a chance of winning. However, after using the sacrificial summoning spell, he fell into an extremely long cooldown time. Now he could only choose to believe in his magic guide spirit. However, just as he finished speaking, in the red summoning area, the huge slime's body suddenly lit up. Then, 2 white rays of light shot out from its body. Stephen Combs was very familiar with this scene. Dark Diamond's magic guide fairy was able to use magic to split offerings. It was much stronger than his mud monster, by quite a bit. And these 2 white rays of light were definitely Dake Diamond's sacrificial summoning spell. Too fast. Although it was not the first time he saw it, Stephen Combs still felt unwilling in his heart. He had clearly been practicing hard, but the final result was far inferior. The only thing that prevented him from feeling despair was that whether it was a normal summoning spell or a sacrificial summoning spell, there was a theoretical limit. Dake dimming had reached its limit first. Although he was a little slower, he could still catch up. This thought quickly flashed through his mind. Then he saw that in the new sacrificial summoning array, the frightening white cat appeared. Although it was a 4-star creature, it had a 5-star Diru beast. This made his calculation of his chances of winning instantly fall to the bottom. I can't be anxious. In theory, the stats of the fusion beast are higher than that of the Diru beast. He forcefully encouraged himself, trying to find a chance of winning. However, when his gaze fell on the red summoning area again, his eyelids suddenly twitched. He saw the black Diru beast and the Diru beast at the same time. Although Dake had only appeared a few times on the duel stage, Stephen Combs, who had studied it in detail, immediately made a connection. Then his heart felt as if it had been blocked. He held his breath and stared, not daring to breathe. Then he suddenly raised his head and looked at Dake dimming on the red team's platform. Under his gaze, Dake dimming very calmly took out the next magic card and began a new summoning. The fusion summoning also only required a normal summoning spell. However, the summoning time was actually dependent on the rate of magic input. If the Magus had enough magic and the speed of the magic input was very high, he could provide enough magic to the fusion card in 3 seconds. Then he could activate it within the limit of a normal summoning spell. Dake's magic talent supported him to have the foundation to do this. If an ordinary archmage's channel was like a small water pipe, then the channel he used was like a ditch. And as time went on, it continued to grow until it reached an unknown limit. At this moment, in the duel arena, Stephen Combs' fusion beast had just swum through the swamp. It wriggled its 8 tentacles and dragged a long trail of mud as it rushed through the center line of the arena. Greedy Slime, too, turned around and swallowed the red magic ball into its stomach. Black Diru Beast and Diru Beast were behind it, staring at each other. Little Devil Beast and Diru Beast originally didn't get along. After evolving into Black Diru Beast, the feeling of mutual repulsion became even more serious. If it wasn't for Dake's gaze, they would have fought on the spot. However, when the two magic elves saw each other, they immediately understood Dake's thoughts. So even though they hated it, they could only wait quietly. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon fusion. Dake slightly raised the fusion magic card. When the summoning was successful, he flipped the card to the front. The black and white fish that hadn't been seen in a long time quickly swam out of the card and grew with the wind. As usual, the white fish flew to Diru Beast. The black fish flew to Black Diru Beast. The expressions of the two magic elves relaxed, and they extended their claws as if they were welcoming two fishes. The white and black fish circled around them, and then turned into two bright lights that soared into the sky. Until then, many of the audience suddenly reacted. Someone was using fusion summoning. Then cheers suddenly sounded. In the rapidly rising background noise, the two rays of light riding on the fish converged into a Tai Chi pattern in the air, forming a huge and mysterious fusion summoning array. From the center of this summoning array, an even more intense light instantly shot out. 7-star magic elf, Basti Beast, appeared again. Basti Beast lightly pursed its lips, not caring about the situation in the arena at all. It looked up at the red contestant platform above its head. However, the electronic interference plus interference spell barrier made the view above extremely bad. It couldn't help but frown slightly and flicked its finger. From its claw that was studded with rings, a drop of bright red blood instantly shot out. The moment the drop of blood that contained the power of darkness touched the interference barrier, it quickly radiated in all directions like a ripple. In the blink of an eye, the barrier that should have had an interference effect on magic was broken down by magic power. As the blood scattered, the sky returned to normal. The corners of Basti Beast's mouth curled up, revealing a charming smile. Then its gaze fell on Dake Dimming's face. The fusion of two individual consciousnesses was a very wonderful experience. In reality, even if creatures with fusion abilities had telepathy with each other, after fusion, there would inevitably be conflicts in their consciousnesses. But this wouldn't happen in magic elves. This depended on the uniqueness of magic elves. It was also because normal magic elves didn't have consciousness. But Dake's magic elves had consciousness. However, after Diru Beast and Diru Beast fused and evolved, there wouldn't be any conflicts in their consciousnesses. They almost became a single entity, and the thoughts that originated from Diru Beast and Diru Beast overlapped or offset each other, forming completely different personalities and thoughts. Although Dake rarely summoned it in a duel, he also used it for research purposes. However, during research experiments, they would also summon them to assist in research, so they already had a very deep understanding of the Basti Beast. The biggest difference between the Basti Beast and the Heidi Beast and the Diru Beast in terms of personality was that it had become very bold. This caused Dake a lot of trouble. Dake lowered his head and looked at Basti Beast with fiery eyes. He said helplessly, "Let's end the duel first." Meow Heartsuit, Basti Beast, put its claws under the veil, stuck out its tongue, and licked it, revealing an unusually charming smile. As the cat goddess incarnated by Bliss, her frown and smile were full of charm. Tick. The battle stage switched to the third round. But at this moment, neither side drew their cards. Dake was already sure of his victory. Stephen clearly knew that there was no magic card in his deck that could deal with this 7-star magic fairy. No matter what he drew, it would not change the outcome of the duel. He placed his hand on the table and took a deep breath. He tried his best to maintain his usual expression. The result was not unexpected. It was just that he had been using all kinds of possibilities to boost morale and keep telling himself that he had a chance to win, including the communication before the preparation stage. It was also for this reason. If he did not do this, he was worried that he would not be able to recite the spell well. The pressure that Dake Dimming brought to his peers was that great. Although the synthetic beast was a 5-star, it could not last one round in front of Basti Beast. Basti Beast did not use chaos or vampire's dance. Instead, it just stretched out its hand and controlled the power of darkness to condense a long whip that was as thick as a bucket. It held the end of the long whip with its 5 fingers and danced like a queen, whipping the synthetic beast fiercely. The ugly synthetic beast was smashed into pieces by the long whip. Then, it shook its hand again, and the long whip condensed by the power of darkness instantly collapsed into countless black bats that flew toward the blue magic ball. These countless bats drowned the magic ball and bit the life enchantment into pieces in the blink of an eye. Basti Beast's innate ability to control the power of darkness always made people suspect that it was not a magic fairy at all. Beep. Battle ended. Winner, Dake Dimming. This duel did not encounter too many obstacles from beginning to end and ended smoothly. However, Dake did get a warning from this duel. He quickly thought about how to deal with it and how to resolve it. Then he began to recall the magic fairy back into the card. However, he was suddenly stuck when he recalled the trash slime. Then he suddenly remembered that after fusion, the magic fairy could only be recalled separately after fusion was removed. He had not mastered fusion removal yet, so he could only wait for the effect of fusion to end naturally. Therefore, he only kept the magic card in his hand. After tidying it up, he raised his head slightly and looked across. Stephen saw him looking over and could not help but say, "Aye." Dake smiled and said, "Thank you." Then he waved at Stephen and walked off the stage amidst applause and cheers. Basti Beast had already walked out of the arena and was waiting below the contestant platform. The man and the pet entered the contestant passage in the blink of an eye. When there was no one around, the Basti Beast's face immediately showed a mischievous expression. Then it suddenly took 2 steps forward and put one of its hands into the crook of Dark's arm. At the same time, half of its body was attached to Dark's body. Dake immediately smelled a strong musk, and his arm was surrounded by softness. However, he was already used to it and did not care much. Basti Beast rubbed its cheeks as it walked. Its 2 big eyes curved into cute crescents, and the 2 tails behind it kept swinging. Dake deliberately stayed in the contestant passage for a quarter of an hour, and then walked out with a comfortable face. After this duel, he did not have any missions in the afternoon. It just so happened that Deanna and Luosi did not have any matches scheduled either. Therefore, the 3 of them agreed to go to Traveler's Street in the afternoon. Seeing Dake's figure appear at the entrance of the contestant passage, Deanna's eyes lit up. She immediately pulled Luosi and jogged over together. When she arrived in front of Dake, she stopped abruptly and then jumped lightly. When she landed, she shook up and down and complained cheerfully, "Why did you only come out now?" Dake shrugged and said, "Waiting for the fusion to be removed." "Okay." Deanna was just asking casually, but now she immediately changed the topic. "How about it? Have you thought about what you will be playing this time?" Dake said, "I still have the knight. Well, the Night Prince suit in my dorm." Deanna blinked and asked curiously, "Haven't you tried it on?" Dake nodded subconsciously and asked, "What's wrong?" Deanna immediately gestured to her chest and said, "It's too small." 12 or 13 years old was the period of rapid development. It had been almost a year since they bought the Night Prince and Night Princess suits last year. Whether it was Dake or Deanna, they had grown a lot taller. Naturally, the 2 sets of clothes that were custom-made last year could no longer be worn. Luosi on the side also laughed and said, "It seems that Dake didn't notice it at all." Dake touched his nose and admitted, I didn't expect this either. Then I win. Deanna immediately raised her hand. Dake said helplessly, okay, you win. The three of them walked out of the open-air arena and walked towards the lake that led to the Traveler's Street. Along the way, the three of them talked about the theme of Halloween costumes enthusiastically and laughed nonstop. When they arrived at the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Dake was about to sit down on the stone stool, but Deanna grabbed his hand. Deanna blinked and said, let's think about it for a while before we go in. Okay. Dake nodded and sat down on the edge of the pavilion. The autumn wind rustled, and the withered leaves drifted into the lake with the wind, causing ripples to appear on the surface of the lake. Students who knew each other and didn't know each other frequently came in and out of the hub of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Groups of people sat on the stone stools beside the 8 stone tables, one after another. Dake, Deanna, and Deanna sat on the edge of the pavilion and expressed their opinions. Time passed slowly. Halfway through her speech, Deanna suddenly frowned as if she had recalled some unpleasant memories. Then, she relaxed her brows and her eyes lit up. She said, last year, the three of us only acted as normal humans on Halloween. How about we dress up as animals this year? Just like Princess and Chi, we can dress up as a bear. Dake blinked and changed the topic naturally. Speaking of Chi, I wonder what they will dress up as this year. And Victoria, Phoenix and Aurora. Don't change the topic, you just don't want to wear a puppet costume. Deanna puffed up her cheeks. Dake laughed and reasoned. It's not like you don't know that on Halloween, the last dance is just the end. The real focus is on the activities before the dance. Wearing a puppet costume is not good for moving around. Don't you want to earn credits? Deanna couldn't help but say, yes I do, but Luosi interrupted. Although credits are important, it's also very important to have a happy Halloween. Deanna nodded quickly and said, yes. Dake thought about it and felt that he might be a little too utilitarian. But he really didn't want to wear a puppet costume. What fun could there be in wrapping oneself in a heavy costume that didn't allow air to flow? If he wanted to dress up as an animal, he might as well wear cat ears. Dake pondered for a while and said, why don't we compromise and dress up as orcs? How can you compromise like that? Luosi couldn't help but chuckle. Dake said seriously, humans and beasts, if we compromise, will be orcs, right? If Deanna wants to dress up as a bear, she can wear bear ears. That's cute, isn't it? Deanna's cheeks blushed inexplicably and she said shyly, then forget it. It's not pure. Dake didn't know what to say. Luosi looked at the two of them and suddenly had an idea. She said, if that's the case, why don't we dress up as characters with Halloween characteristics such as ghosts, zombies, mummies? Dake said, werewolves, vampires? Luosi nodded and said, witches, fairies, pumpkins, and so on. Dake laughed and said, undead birds, Bigfoot, and gargoyles. Then he said, thinking about it this way, Victoria and Phoenix only need to dress up as themselves. Deanna asked curiously, does a bear monster count? Dake said, if you say so, then so be it. Deanna said unhappily, how can you do that? Luosi nudged her arm and said, why don't we dress up as witches? We just need to customize a costume like Professor Mitya's, and we can wear it after Halloween. Deanna said seriously, then we'll wear the school uniform. Won't we still be witches? Luosi was speechless. After a while she said, then we'll be fairies? Just put a pair of wings on your back. Deanna shook her head hard. Fairies are all floating. Like Professor Lily, you can't be a fairies with just a pair of wings. You troublesome fairies. Luosi shouted and grabbed her. The two of them couldn't help but fight. Dake sat alone on the side and said slowly, vampires are actually not bad. They're simple, convenient, and popular. Also, we can customize a set of wings like Victoria's. Werewolves, Bigfoot, gargoyles, and the like are not necessary. Ghosts, zombies, and mummies are actually not bad. Deanna stopped and gestured. A mummy wrapped in bandages? Dake pointed to his face and hands and said, just wrap the exposed parts. Think about it carefully, this is probably the most economical and practical costume. Deanna asked curiously, what about zombies? Dake said, jumping. Diana hurriedly said, Then let's stick with mummies. Let me give you an example. Dake shook his head and said, if you don't like vampires, then ghosts. Deanna gestured again. The kind of ghosts that cover their heads with a sheet? Dake shook his head and said, of course not. There are thousands of kinds of ghosts. The only thing they have in common is that they are all souls. Their bodies are always in a semi-transparent state. So we only need a bottle of low-quality invisibility potion to achieve the effect of disguising ourselves as ghosts. Deanna asked, why low quality? Dake said, because the standard invisibility potion will make you completely invisible. Of course, the effect of the potion has a time limit, so we need to prepare a few more. 25/127. Good morning. 8,000 words equals 4 chapters. Looking for monthly votes and a guaranteed blade. Also looking for opinions on Christmas costumes. What should we dress up as? Chapter 625. I think so. Luosi concluded. Witches, fairies, spirits, and vampires. You can choose one of these 4. These 4 costumes are relatively easy to dress up, and they won't affect your movements. Most importantly, they won't be too ugly. Girls really paid more attention to their appearance. Dake smiled and said, I agree. This year's Halloween ball will not be like last year's. Because of the princess's visit, everyone will be dressed in suits and leather shoes. Even if the costumes are a little weird, they won't be too outstanding. Deanna patted her cheek and said, but aren't Anna and Enchi in the college? Dake said, when they return after graduation, they may enjoy the same treatment. Deanna couldn't help but think, I wonder what kind of costumes they will choose this year? Dake smiled and said, when it's Halloween you'll see. I hope there won't be any weird surprises. Sigh. Diana patted her cheeks and said, let me think about it. Dake nodded and said, let's go to Traveler's Street first. We'll think about it while we walk. Then the 3 of them chose a stone table and sat down on the stone seats around it. When the transmission hub turned, they turned around and entered Traveler's Street. There was still some time before Halloween on October 31st, but Traveler's Street had already been decorated in advance. Many students who had rushed to the party had already put on all kinds of costumes and were running around Traveler's Street. Every time this time, some students would sell the half-finished costume change card that they had prepared in advance at the street stalls. Dake once bought the night dress mask change card from one of the seniors' stalls, although it was shelved because of the quality problem. But his research on the swap card had indeed started from that swap card. Thinking about it carefully, with his current level he could completely make the change card by himself, but it was too troublesome and unnecessary. While thinking, he suddenly found Senior Leon, who was hawking on the street. I wonder if Senior Lion's level of making the outfit card has improved compared to last year? However, after pondering for a while, Dake didn't go over to take a look. Compared to a costume change card, he was more willing to go to a clothing store to buy high-quality clothes, preferably the kind that could be worn outside of Halloween. Speaking of which, why don't you disguise yourself as a vampire? Dark's heart suddenly stirred, and he had some intentions. Vampires had all kinds of costumes, but most of them were actually aristocratic costumes, with a pair of wings, a white face, scarlet eyeshadow, and blood-red fangs. In other words, as long as those unnecessary decorations were removed, it would be a set of everyday clothes. Compared to the Night Prince set, that couldn't be worn outside, it was obviously a better choice. A black suit, a black top hat, and a walking stick. That's an old vampire with a great presence. Dake rubbed his chin, wondering if he should get some wrinkles. Then he saw that Deanna and Luosi were already submerged in all kinds of replacement cards. After a long time, Dake finally pulled them out of the sea of replacement cards. At this time, Deanna and Luosi already had their own ideas. After all, they had been observing the outfit card for so long, and they were always inspired. Luosi had already decided to play the role of an active little fairy. Deanna was very interested in playing the role of a ghost. Then Miss Fairy and Princess Spectre. Dake smiled and said, but prepare the levitation spell, and the inferior, invisibility potion. Dake actually felt that Deanna was more suitable to play the role of a little fairy, and Luosi was more suitable for the image of Princess Spectre. However, the Halloween costume party wasn't that serious. Of course, they could do whatever they wanted. What about you? Deanna looked up and asked. Dake said, Mr. Vampire. There were clothing stores in Traveler's Street that specialized in custom-made wings, fangs, and other small props. The three of them walked and shopped, and finally chose a store to enter, ordered the relevant props, and measured the size. They were expected to pick up the goods next Saturday. After that, they turned to other types of clothing stores to buy the clothes they were going to wear when the time came. When they left Traveler's Street, they had each chosen a set of clothes. Dark was able to purchase a full set of black clothing, including a hat, as well as a walking stick that he had carefully picked out. The quality of the cane was good. Maybe it could be used to exorcise ghosts during activities. Diana, on the other hand, bought a flawless snow-white princess dress. There was no other color on the dress other than white. Coupled with her silver-white hair, if she suddenly appeared in the middle of the night, she might really scare people. Then Luosi, she chose a set of casual clothes similar to Professor Lily's. When they returned to the tower of the aristocrat house, the three of them separated on the third floor. Deanna and Luosi entered the same room playfully, then suddenly closed the door and quieted down at the same time. How is it? Do you have any plans for this year? Luosi asked. Deanna said, the vampire prince and the ghost princess. Luosi shook his head. Last year, it was useless even if you wore matching outfits, let alone this kind of pairing. Deanna couldn't help but pout. Then what should we do? Luosi said. If you ask me, this year there are no princesses in the way. As long as we invite them first, it will be easy. Deanna couldn't help but think of last year's Halloween, and frowned again. Dake Dimming, who returned to dorm 301, put down the clothes and continued to immerse himself in his studies and research. At this time last year, the students were already worried about their dance partner for Halloween, and this year was no exception. However, compared to last year, the dating atmosphere this year was indeed a bit weaker. After the students reached the second grade, they were obviously more concerned about their academic performance, so they didn't have much time to think about things outside of their studies. And this year there was no trend of love divination. Instead, it was replaced by simulated duels. Speaking of mock duels, the Duel Club of the People, on Traveler's Street had already posted a notice about a special Halloween event. It said that a new Halloween-themed card would be released on Halloween, which attracted the interest of many students. Dake didn't participate in the design this time, and he was also curious. This year's Halloween was on Thursday night, and Friday was Halloween. The following Saturday and Sunday were holidays. In addition, the opening ceremony of the Golden Cup would be held on November 1st, Halloween. The simulated duels Halloween-themed card, as well as the new poster and sales information, would be announced during the opening ceremony of the Golden Cup. Dake was looking forward to it. After a quiet night, it was Sunday in the blink of an eye. Dake arrived at the open-air dueling arena at around 10 a.m., and then he went straight to the contestants' tunnel. Deanna and Luosi didn't have any matches today, so they didn't come to the dueling arena to watch the matches. In fact, they had entered the dungeon early in the morning, and they were ready to go on an adventure. Dark, on the other hand, was about to welcome the final battle of the Silver Cup points competition. Until today he had participated in a total of 9 matches, and he won all 9 matches. He was ranked first in the Silver Cup competition for year 2, but this had a lot to do with the number of matches he had. After a month or so, there might be someone who would surpass him with more matches. He didn't care about that. After today's match, the homework assigned by Professor Cheong-si will be completed. Dake thought as he went to the contestants' waiting room. There was still some time before the start of the match, so he observed the other contestants' matches and organized his cards. He only walked out of the waiting room and entered the dueling arena when he received a reminder from the dueling club. When he arrived, his opponent was already waiting for him at the dueling arena. It was the head of the Year 2 Night Academy, a boy with excellent EQ and IQ, Justin Wayne. As the most popular person in the Year 2 Night Academy, Justin Wayne could be said to be the standard sunshine boy. and he was quite popular. He politely shook Dake's hand and nodded. Although the possibility is not high, I will try my best to win. Dake also politely said, anything is possible in the dueling arena. I hope we can have a good duel. Okay. Justin Wayne couldn't help but smile. Then the two of them let go of their hands and walked back to their respective contestants' platforms. Dake was assigned to the blue side, and Justin Wayne was assigned to the red side. As soon as the two of them stepped onto the contestants' platform, there were immediately shouts from the audience. Without a doubt, it was the Knight Academy and Noble Academy students who were bored. Dake didn't care about those voices. Instead, after putting the deck into the card slot, he observed Justin Wayne on the opposite side of the contestants' platform. Justin Wayne was the sort of man who, in face and in temperament, would have been spontaneously favored. Dake didn't have much interaction with him, but after a year, he had some understanding of him. He had always felt that Justin Wayne might be more suitable for the Academy of the Holy Church's Mystic Rites. In the Academy of the Holy Church's Mystic Rites, he would definitely become an outstanding paladin. Beep! The referee's whistle interrupted Dake's train of thought. He smiled at Justin Wayne, who was also looking at him, and began to concentrate on his preparations. Justin Wayne used a very standard paladin series of cards. The paladin series of cards, apart from having more light elemental magic elves, had no special characteristics. In other words, everything was taken care of. Everything was taken care of. If the average level wasn't high, it meant that they couldn't be nurtured well. Of course, if the average level was the best, it would be all-rounder. Justin Wayne was only a second year, so of course he couldn't bear the title of all-rounder. But compared to some of the other second-year students, his deck was quite comprehensive. Dake didn't underestimate him. Tick. After both contestants finished shuffling their cards, a 30-second countdown appeared behind the words, "Preparation Stage." The duel began. After stepping onto the contestants' platform, the two sides didn't communicate. Their auras were slightly heavy, giving people the feeling that they were going all out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dake quickly drew his cards and opened them into a fan shape in his left hand. The starting 5 magic cards for the final duel of the Silver Cup points competition came into view. Diru Beast, Original Dragon Egg, Pride Dragon, Underworld Soul Ring, Fantasy Beast, Ibu. The first magic card he drew was the Cat of Victory, Diru Beast. But he didn't have a sacrifice in his hand that could summon the Diru Beast. Well, that wasn't the case. There's a high chance that Justin Wayne's initial target is a 3-star magic elf. If we use the Underworld Soul Ring to capture it, and use the 1-star Illusory Beast, Ibu, we'll be able to gather a 4-star offering. But among the cards in my hand, this isn't the best choice. Dake's gaze fell on the Original Dragon Egg.